It's 4:01, so I'll call the meeting to order. We have everybody here. Welcome to the first meeting of the new year of the Planning and Environment Committee. First of all, I will say that the City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility at london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. To make a request specific to this meeting, please contact pec@london.ca. That's a new line. So with that, I will check with the committee to see if there are any disclosures of pecuniary interest. And I'm seeing none. So we will move along to the election of the vice chair for the term ending November 30th, 2020. And I will look for Councillor Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. I would like to nominate Councillor Turner.
Wonderful. Do I have a second? And I see a second in Councillor Hopkins. Any other interested parties or people wanting to nominate? I'm not seeing any. So we will call the vote on the election of Councillor Turner as vice chair.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Congratulations, Councillor Vice Chair Turner. With that, I will move on to the consent items. Are there any items that people wish pulled? Deputy Mayor Helmer.
I just noticed there's a revised page for 2.4, and I wonder if we should pull that just to deal with that separately. I'm not sure if colleagues want to do that, but I think that seems like a good idea.
Grand idea. Any other items? So I need a motion for all of the consent items except for item 2.4, moved by the mayor, seconded by Deputy Mayor Helmer. Any comments on any items or questions? I'm seeing none. I'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Wonderful. That brings us to item 2.4, the delegated authority for consent. I'll go to Ms. Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, the changes that were reflected in the added agenda is a change on the last page under the next steps and conclusion to recognize that the enacting date for the bylaw would be the 1st of May 2020. This is on the advice that we received from the Clerk's Department, whereas previously the report as drafted had indicated that we would bring it back at a future date and withhold the 3 readings. So on the advice of the Clerk's Department, we have revised this such that it would be passed by Council if that were their wish on December the 10th, and then the changes would be enacted May 1st, 2020.
Thank you. Any comments or questions from committee on this item? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just, there's a couple items, this one and later when we have a public participation meeting. I'm not sure how to ask the question best, but I think that the challenge for me is kind of seeing the realignment or the alignment of development services and planning and how things have kind of bifurcated since the reorganization of those portfolios. And now with this, and then later on in the agenda, as we take a look at the Urban Design Review Panel, both of those seem to be in the realm of planning, and then they're being moved over into development services. And I don't think I have a full appreciation for how the reorganization has gone and what the future state is. And so it becomes hard for me to kind of judge these in isolation without having a concept of what that future path is. And so perhaps I could just ask for you for a bit of comment around that, if I could.
Through you, Madam Chair. So for the item that's before you right now, this actually isn't related to the reorganization that occurred last year. Development Services has, to my knowledge, for the better part of 10 years, been doing consent matters in-house, providing both the planning and engineering knowledge for that. The city planner was the consent authority, which has been consistent with what we've had. So it's not an item associated with any sort of organizational matters. It's really to add more public participation into the SOUP and to better align with that and the items that are in the report.
Further, there's the duties that have been assigned to the Committee of Adjustment that are being sought to be brought off and put into their own kind of administrative, or I guess, panel tribunal that we would create. What does that look like in its own, and how does that develop out? I know that that's why we're postponing the implementation of this until May. Are we looking to recruit more citizens as a panel? Is this? It sounds like it's going to be a fair amount of work just to create that process too.
Through you, Madam Chair, currently there are 5 members that sit on the Committee of Adjustment. They also act as the Property Standards Appeal Committee. And so the direction that we're moving towards is that those 5 individuals would no longer hold the role and responsibility of the Property Standards Committee, that would be moved to 5 different hearing officers. That would therefore free up the capacity for the committee, as they sit as the Committee of Adjustment, to hear these consent applications. Often with consent applications, particularly with regards to lot creation, they can then create situations where variances are then required as well. And so in the Committee of Adjustment, both hearing the consent and the minor variance applications, the decisions on these related matters could be considered concurrently and through a public process where there is that opportunity for a public hearing before the decision-making board, whereas the current state is one where the decision-making is primarily an administrative function.
Yeah, thank you. That was well covered in the report. I think the part that I wasn't really clear on was the new panel that would deal with the property standards. How is that created? What's the process for that? Recognizing that's probably in a separate report and all of that, but still I think it's kind of pertinent to the discussion at hand here.
Councillor, I think the clerk can answer that.
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, as you are likely aware, we currently have a number of appeals to our bylaws that are dealt with by our hearings officers, which are independent individuals that are appointed by council. We currently have 4 members that we rotate through the different appeals that come in. I will be bringing a report looking to appoint 2 more. The panel for property standards appeals is a minimum of 3, so the clerk's office would be processing the appeals under the hearings officers with the support of development services at those hearings. So it's not, we already have the process in place. It's been working quite well for the last few years, so it's just a matter of appointing a couple more hearings officers to give us enough to deal with all of the appeals.
Okay, thank you. So it sounds like it's taking existing capacity, expanding it a little bit, and shifting responsibilities or additional responsibilities to that board and panel that would do that. Okay, and the other question was with respect to consents as they're currently happening. Are there often many appeals to those consents and decisions that are being made by the consent authority in their own right, or is this something that is just generally pretty administrative in nature, which is what it seems like, that for it to be heard by an adjudicating panel, it seems like a lot of work that a panel would be looking for if there's not much in terms of questioning or reversals on those decisions.
Through you, Madam Chair, we do have appeals to consent matters from time to time. Lot creation and consent-related matters generally do have quite a bit of public interest to them, so we do get quite a few comments that you'll have, especially when they're dealing with matters of intensification and fit and things like that. So that's another reason why we think it would be good to have considered with committee. As the report does indicate, we do often have consents that have variances associated with them as well, so it makes sense from our perspective to make sure everything's packaged up, so it's one conversation, one look at like items that are through the process that's proposed here.
Through you, Madam Chair, if I could just add, so the bylaw that's before you as well also considers moving the more administrative matters such that they would be dealt with by an appointed official. So those matters that don't often result in a lot of public interest, that are more technical matters, they would still be heard by an delegated official as opposed to the committee. So that would cut down on that workload to the Committee of Adjustment.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate the effort to make them more transparent as well. I recognize that. The trade-off with that is speed and efficiency too. And if there aren't a lot of contestations to decisions of the consent authority, then I guess it wouldn't make too much sense. But if there's an interest, and especially to harmonize the process, I can appreciate that. But I did have a lot of questions that came out of reading the report, so I'm glad I had a chance to ask. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. A quick question through you to staff about the training. It was touched upon in the report here, but is there something that you can add to how does the training, is it just part of the natural training that people that go onto these committees go through, or is it looked at in a broader training perspective? Just curious as we go through this process.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Often when we have a new committee that comes into place, there is training that is provided for them. The current Committee of Adjustment that is sitting would not have heard consent applications in the past, so this is something that we would like to bring forward for their benefit prior to bringing any consent applications to them, so they understand the matters under the Act and how these decisions are made. The other thing is looking at a terms of reference that would set out the expectations both for the committee but for the public as to the protocols and how decisions are made before the Committee of Adjustment with regards to minor variance and consent. So those are things that we would look to put in place prior to applications going to the Committee of Adjustment in May 1st, 2020.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Chair. It certainly seems logical to do this. My question from a timing standpoint is May 1st give sufficient time for these hearing officers to be appointed in the appropriate training to ensure that there's a continuity and a flow of the business that has to be done.
Through you, Madam Chair, we feel that in terms of bringing forward a terms of reference and the training for the committee, that the time that we've put forth, the first quarter of 2020 would be sufficient for that purposes. I would probably defer to others with regards to the hearing officers as they relate to property standards.
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, I've already spoken to the hearings officers. They're all lawyers, retired lawyers, so they're quite familiar with how to run a hearing and have been doing it for us for a number of years. So I'm confident they'll be fine.
Any other questions or comments on this item? Oh, do I have a mover? Deputy Mayor Helmer, seconded by the mayor, and I'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, that brings us to our first public participation meeting. Before I go there, I want to say welcome to Councillor Kayabaga, welcome to Planning and Environment. The four of us and the mayor have been together for a year now, so it's good to have you join us. I need a mover to open the PPM for the application at 448 Oxford Street East, moved by Councillor Kayabaga, seconded by Councillor Turner, and I'll call the vote. Okay, before we get started, I just want to look up in the gallery and see if there is any member of the public here who is interested in this item, 448 Oxford Street East. If you're interested, raise your hand. You're with the applicant, Mr. Kirkness? Okay, any other members of the public here for this item? Yes, there is. Okay, so we have a presentation from staff on, these are the applicants? Yes. Okay, and no other members of the public here for that? So first I will go to committee to see if committee needs a presentation on this. I don't see any nods. So a 30-second to 2-minute introduction of this item would be wonderful. And then I will go to the representative of the applicant.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the applicant here is just looking to add a medical dental office as a permitted use within the existing zoning. So it is already an office conversion zone on it with a residential component. So we're just looking to maintain that residential unit, add that medical dental office use, recognize reduced parking by 1 space, and then just existing conditions with the exterior side yard setback. We received no feedback from the public on this, and staff are in support of the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Will the representative of the applicant like to say something? Welcome, Mr. Kirkness. We know who you are. Do we need his address?
Thank you. Laverne Kirkness, Kirkness Planning Consultants, Madam Chair and committee members. And I have with me Dr. Riyad Kamis, perhaps he could stand, and his dad, Mac, beside him, who's been supporting him and wants to do the renovations in this office that he's purchased at Oxford and Thornton. And we agree with the report that Melanie was going to present, and we hope that you do too and recommend it to council. We've been waiting all fall really to get into this establishment, but I think that most important about this is Dr. Riyad Kamis has got quite a set of unique credentials, and London's always interested in knowing how it attracts the best and brightest and the skills. And I wonder if I could just read to you some of the things here, because this is kind of unique in London. He's more than an optometrist, but he completed his undergraduate training at the University of Waterloo with a Bachelor of Biomedical Science and honors from the University of Waterloo. He then went on to complete his Doctor of Optometry at the University of Waterloo, School of Optometry and Vision Science, where he graduated on the Dean's Honor List. After completion of his OD degree, Dr. Camus furthered his education by completing a one-year optional extensive residency program in family practice with an emphasis on ocular disease at Northeastern State University in Oklahoma. And during his residency, Dr. Camus became a trained surgeon and performed anterior segment laser procedures as well as minor surgical eyelid procedures. Dr. Camus worked in the optometry wing of a Native American hospital as well as the ocular trauma and disease unit in the urgent care department. He's an avid sportsman himself. Dr. Camus also developed a keen interest in vision therapy and sports vision, where he lectured and supervised students at NSU. He served as the faculty advisor for sports vision at NSU, working with both college and Olympic athletes. Dr. Camus brought his experience in both primary care and ocular disease to Highbury Huron Optometry, which is 1288 Highbury, where he has been practicing, as well as starting the innovative London Vision Development Centre. The London Vision Development Centre is then his to perform vision therapy and sports vision for children and adults, but not limited to vision problems that interfere with school performance, crossed, wandering, or lazy eyes, as well as neurooptometric rehabilitation for traumatic brain injuries. So he also provides vision therapy for athletes seeking to gain an edge through visual performance. Related to this, and the word that's missing here, is that he's working with a lot of concussion therapy, and that will be kind of one of the focuses at 448 Oxford. And I could go on, but I think you got the gist of it. This young man has got many skills that have not really been here in London, and so I myself am glad to be able to represent him in this zoning application. And thank you very much. If there are any questions to Dr. Riad Camus or myself, we'd be glad to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kirkness. Any technical questions from committee? I'm not seeing any. I'll ask one more time to see if there's any members of the public in the gallery that would like to speak to this application at 448 Oxford Street East. And I'm not seeing any, so I'll look for a motion to close the PPM. Moved by the mayor and seconded by Councillor Kayabaga. Sorry, Councillor Hopkins, you had your hand up first and I completely missed it. Did you get that? So I'll call the vote on closing the PPM.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Councillor Hopkins.
I was just going to say I'd be happy to move this motion for a medical dental office. I would think anything that's located along such a well-serviced transit corridor is also a good feature.
So moved, the staff recommendation is moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Deputy Mayor Helmer. Any other questions or comments? No, great. Excellent introduction there, Mr. Kirkness. So I'll call the vote on that.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Next item up is 3.2, another public participation meeting regarding the urban design peer review panel terms of reference update. I need a mover to open that. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Kayabaga. I'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And I know we do have members of the public interested in this item, so I will go to staff for a brief presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to apologize in advance. Usually urban design presentations are full of vivid images and cool stuff. This one's a little bit more dry than typical, but I did manage to find one picture, and we'll start it off there. So the Urban Design Peer Review Panel was established back in 2008 by Council as part of the urban design program back in that time. And since then, we've actually had over 300 applications that were reviewed by the Urban Design Peer Review Panel. And over the last 10 years, as you can imagine, you have our terms of reference, and you want to make sure that it stays up to date, and lots of things have changed over time. And we've heard lots of good suggestions and opportunities, and there's been other kind of issues that have occurred over the years. We finally found an opportunity to update the terms of reference when we were directed by yourselves to do that back in June of 2019. And the intent of this was to provide greater clarity, certainty, and consistency with the operation and functioning of the panel. So we had opened up invitations to a group of stakeholders. We included current and past urban design peer review panel members, the development industry, consultants, which included planners, architects, landscape architects, and other related professionals, as well as the Urban League. We did hold 4 meetings, and we started off in July of this year. We had invited everybody who wanted to come out to this meeting as part of those stakeholder groups. We discussed high-level issues and opportunities, and from that we established a working group, which was a much smaller group, to focus on the actual update of the terms of reference. And with that group, we actually ended up having 3 meetings. Our first meeting was to look over kind of everything that came out of the issues and opportunities list from the larger group, as well as establish some of the kind of the quick wins, the things that are really easily done and that could be changed very easily. And then from there, when we met for the other 2 meetings, we had actually prepared a draft that we worked through kind of with the entire group, section by section, to try to hammer everything out. And I will say that it was great working with the working group. We definitely had very good meetings, very productive meetings, and it seems that everybody came to a consensus, and we're able to bring this document forward to you today. We also met with the Urban Design Peer Review Panel, the current members, during our monthly meetings that occur, in terms of all the different the updates, and as well as the drafts were brought to them for their feedback. Just a quick summary of some of the changes that we have proposed through this update. And so they're up on the screen for you today. So they're redefining the purpose of the panel, where we've just kind of looked at breaking that into 2 sections, looking at the purpose and the responsibility of the panel. This would provide for further clarity for the panel, for future panelists, for the development industry, the general public, as well as just even for the panelists and the purpose of the creation of the panel, why it was created. Looking at the redefining the scope of work was the second kind of key change, and that was brought up to date with some of the language that's currently found in the London Plan. The third change was defining quorum and alternative means of review. So in order to ensure that there's no delays in the application review process, a section regarding quorum was established and was added to that. And we also provided for an alternate means of review. We want to make sure that, applications that we want to make sure that are reviewed by the panel are actually reviewed. And if unfortunately we can't get everybody to a meeting for whatever reason, we still want to be able to have that reviewed and provide staff and ultimately council with some comments from the panel. And so having this section definitely will eliminate the possibility of not having somebody go or miss a meeting. And just the 2 last key changes that I think are really good for this particular terms of reference are establishing the types of applications to be reviewed by the panel. So that's something that wasn't in the past terms of reference, and that's something that's been kind of a point of contention over time, over the last 10 years, in terms of pushing back on staff on whether something should be going to the panel or not. So we worked really closely with our working group to iron out what should be going to the panel, and essentially the new criteria has a strong relationship to the London Plan, and it specifically relates to the place types. So it speaks to ensuring that mostly just the most urban place types, applications in those areas have to go to the panel. sensitive infill, mid-rise and high-rise buildings, as well as development at identified gateways and identified special character areas would be the ones that would be subject to review. We can go into that more if anybody has questions. And then the last key change, which I think is a really exciting one, that I think the whole working group was very happy that we were able to come to terms with something like this. It's a maybe not the best words for it, but it's called green, we call it green lighting applications that are implementing good urban design. So there was a lot of chat between the working group as to how would we decide what that means, and ultimately we landed on if an application is identified to go to the panel, it would still have to provide for an urban design brief, and that urban design brief would be scheduled to a normal meeting, and then it's going to be up to the panelists themselves who would review the urban design brief and decide whether or not that's something that should have to come before them or not in terms of it meeting the intent of good urban design and policy as well. So I would say that over the last 10 years that we've had the panel and being a part of it for that long, there are a number of applications throughout the year where we bring it forward, but the panel doesn't actually have much to say because it is actually a good application, but it met the criteria to go to the panel. So we just were able to, through this potential green lighting process, find a way to speed up a little bit of time, because all time is valuable for both sides of the table, in particular the development industry. So basically the way that it worked previously was if you're scheduled to go to the panel, even if there aren't any changes really that the panel is requesting, you'd be waiting to get your comments, which come in a couple weeks after the panel meeting, and then you'd be responding to those comments before you can actually submit an application in the site plan process, for example. In this case, you wouldn't have to do that. In this case, if the panel would lets us know that, staff know that it's a green-lit application, that applicant can now submit an application as of the day, basically, that they would have to go to the panel. So that's a positive change. Just to provide you with some next steps, we will be, should council endorse the changes to the terms of reference or the update, we'll be fully implementing this framework starting our January meeting in 2020. And then from January to June, we'll be providing external communications related to the panel changes. We're working closely with the current panel to implement the changes, and we'll also establish a continuous improvement and monitoring framework so that if there are any changes, any major issues with any of what's found in the urban design peer review panel terms of reference document, that we bring it forward back to council at that time. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Any technical questions? Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. Page 131, 4.3 term and 4.4 election of the chair. I note that it says panel members shall serve a 2-year term from the date of their appointment and shall not sit for 2 consecutive terms. But then it says under 4.4 that the panel will elect a chair with a minimum of 1 year experience. But if they've got 2 years experience, according to this, they can't sit on it because you're not allowed to sit for more than one 2-year term. Should that have said shall not sit for more than 2 consecutive terms? I'm a little confused by that.
Go ahead.
Through you, Madam Chair. It can seem a little bit confusing, but actually what happens is the panel has 6 panel members, and there's 3 that come off every year and 3 new panelists that come on that year, the following year, right? So we actually have an overlap that occurs. So the intent of that is that the chair would be elected from the group that is remaining on the panel rather than having somebody who's new to the table.
So when it says, through you, Chair, that the chair should have a minimum of 1 year experience, it really means that they're an incumbent by 1 year and they sit 1 more year and then they're off. Just through you, Chair, to clarify. That's what that means?
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, essentially that's exactly right. So everybody sits 2 years.
Got it. Thanks, Chair.
Any other technical questions? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just through you, perhaps to the clerk, with respect to the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, and the provisions in the former the former draft of this, the 2008 version, applied the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act provisions. In this, it goes a bit further, but it doesn't really directly mention the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act beyond some of the definitions of who family members are. Is there a way that that this can be done? And it seems a little awkward because it introduces our own terms of what the conflicts may be. I was just trying to read through the MCIA in terms of local board, which I'm not sure if this panel has authority or decision making. It sounds like it's more advisory, and it doesn't really have the ability to exercise authority as it would be defined in the Conflict of Interest Act. So just, I guess, looking for a bit of clarity on where the MCIA ends and where we have to create our own definitions here.
Through you, Madam Chair, I didn't review this and I wasn't asked to review this, so I'm assuming the wording might have been taken out of our advisory committee policy that talked about conflicts of interest and how they applied. What we might want to do between now and council is look at what we have for our local boards and our advisory committees and maybe clarify how the MCIA applies.
We'll work with the clerks on that. My understanding is that someone from the clerk's department did review it, not the clerk, maybe herself, but one of her talented staff, so.
And one further technical question, just to the arbitration of an investigation on a complaint about a contravention of the conflict of interest recommends that council be the arbiter of that rather than, say, the integrity commissioner, which may seem like a more appropriate mechanism. Any thoughts to that, I guess?
Through you, Madam Chair, I concur with that. In order for us to apply consistency across all of our boards and commissions and advisory committees, we should be consistent in how we apply it. I will be looking again at our advisory committee policy as well to make it fairly generally the same as what we have for our local boards. So I agree it would be helpful if it was all consistent.
Any other technical questions? No. Is there anyone, sorry, Mr. Yeoman? Sorry, I'm not a very good lip reader and that wasn't even directed at me. So anybody in the gallery here to speak to this matter? Mr. Wallace, you have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Mike Wallace. I'm with LDI, the London Development Institute. Our address is at 562 Wellington Street, just up the road here at Suite 203. First of all, I want to really thank the staff for the effort that they put into the consultation that happened on this. I'll be frank, at the first meeting, we weren't sure what was going to happen in terms of, but the working group came out of it. It was a very active working group. Everyone contributed. It was an excellent process. And I want to thank Jersey and Heather for leading that. From staff's perspective, it was a very good, we didn't get everything we wanted, of course, but it was an excellent discussion and lots of input from all sides, and which resulted in what's here today. The one thing that we agree 100% with what's in here. We didn't really, I'll be frank with you, get into the issues of the wording around conflict of interest. It was actually the panel members who had come back as advisories to the working group were talking about the conflict of interest, and that was, they knew better than what we did on that, so we'll be happy to see what follows up on that. The only thing that, and I think Jersey did an excellent job of explaining it, the one item that is here, it looks like it's not the applicant trying to skip the process. Just to be clear, the process, in terms of the application and the paperwork needed to be done, still gets submitted to the panel. The panel decides whether you use the word skipping here, I wouldn't use the word skipping, that it satisfies good design and doesn't need an actual meeting, and that they decide that it passes on. And we're certainly okay with that. And sometimes they use examples where, on a commercial application where and we'll use Tim Hortons, all the buildings look the same. They have the same, there's sometimes not a requirement really for a urban design panel review because it might be cookie cutter or something that's been approved before. But that's really a panel decision, just so you know that. So we're very much in favor of what's in front of you. Very happy with the process that you had with all stakeholders on this. And since this might be this is the last PEC meeting that I know of before Christmas, I want to wish, on behalf of LDI, all the council members here and the mayor, a very Merry Christmas on behalf of LDI. And I want to thank the staff and wish them a good holiday and happy holiday. You always have a full house of staff here at all these meetings. And since this might be the last chance before Christmas, no, that doesn't mean I'm not coming to the strat plan meeting and the council meeting, but I might not be talking. I just wanted to wish everybody a Merry Christmas. And the final thing I wanted to say is, on behalf of LDI, we wanted to thank Mr. Fleming for his work at the city over the years. I would say my industry may not always agreed with Mr. Fleming's vision. However, he was an excellent person to deal with and was very professional, and we really appreciate the work he's done for the city. And since he's leaving pretty quickly, I thought I'd take this opportunity to thank him for his efforts over the years. So thank you very much. I'll happy to answer any questions anybody has any.
Any other members of the public that wish to speak to this? Mr. Kirkness, go ahead.
Okay, I'll get taller. Madam Chair and committee members, about the urban design review panel terms of reference. I was on the committee as the representative of the London Area Planning Consultants, or LAPSI, as you may know. And we too are kind of echoing the words of Mike Wallace. We appreciate working with Jersey and Heather and Wyatt. They created a very open environment. It was kind of fun to go to the meetings, as a matter of fact. And it wasn't just because of the cookies and coffee, but it was because of the environment they created. And we were able to come to a consensus on all of these things and bring forward to you an improved set of terms of reference, which and I learned that London is certainly not unique in having an urban design review panel. Most cities of any size do, apparently, in Canada. And I have to say to those that are on that review panel, we owe them a lot because they don't get paid compared to what their normal hourly rate is as an architect or a landscape architect. And here they come together for an afternoon once a month. It takes at least a day to prepare, or a half a day. So I always have to respect what they have to say, because it's not that they're earning money to say it. And they're contributing a lot to make this city more beautiful. And if anything, I'd like to see it monitored so that we could see what great performance is coming from that panel. That's something we have to work on yet. But in any case, LAPSI supports what's in front of you, and we thank Jersey and Heather and Wyatt for being able to work with them. Thank you.
Anybody else like to speak to this? I'm not seeing any hands going up in the air, so I will look for a motion to close the PPM, moved by Councillor Keabaga, seconded by Councillor Turner, and I'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Any questions or comments from committee? Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. Through the chair to our staff, this seems to me like with the 6-person committee, some of whom are coming from out of town, and something that's very visual in its nature, that this might be the kind of committee where you might want to allow for video conferencing in if somebody can't make it because the travel time to come in for the meeting, that as long as they could see what's going on and see what the public are saying and and participate through a video conferencing, that would be an effective way of including that input in one of these meetings, and it would cut down on all the transportation costs and the emissions that come from that. And I just wonder to what extent you talked about that and whether you need any kind of direction to allow for that kind of electronic participation in the terms of reference. Now, this is not a committee of council. It's not a council meeting. We have to make our own changes before we could do that sort of thing for these kind of meetings. But for this particular committee, it seems like a good idea if the fifth or sixth person can't make it one meeting, to have that as an option.
Through you, Madam Chair. That is something definitely we have discussed. It's been a discussion, on kind of an ongoing discussion throughout the panel, about cutting costs of transportation and all that. It's something that's possible. I don't think it's precluded in this terms of reference. It won't stop that from happening. I think it's something that we could promote definitely, and look potentially doing that throughout the year if we're unable to meet quorum, kind of as one of the alternatives for sure, and then we can monitor that, see how that works. I think it's always better to have a discussion in the same room in terms of design. Sometimes, you know, pointing to a plan, it's a lot easier if everybody's looking at the same thing. There are some limitations to the technology as well. We've had some issues in terms of being able to set up some of these conferences like that, that are video conferences outside of the city with outside people. So we're working through it, and I know that we can definitely look into that further if we need be.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to move the recommendation. I think it's a good series of changes. I'm glad to hear that the process itself went well, and I imagine there's a lot of talented people involved. I'm sure you can figure out how to do the video conferencing. That's great.
Any other questions? Mr. Mayor, you're seconding it? Mr. Mayor is seconding the motion. Councillor Turner.
Thanks. If the conflict of interest sections can be harmonized and brought to us by a council meeting, then I think then it's probably appropriate. If not, then it probably needs to go back to be reworked. So it sounds like that's a potential.
Through Madam Chair, yes, I mean, we can work together. Mr. Yeoman's indicating that someone from my staff did look at it. So it's just a matter of, you know, if there's some minor amendments, we can bring forward a pre-amendment sheet with those changes. I don't think it needs to be referred back for that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Sorry to be wonkish on this, but it's one of those things. And I appreciate where it's going to, because it's holding a higher standard than the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, because it's the conflicts aren't just pecuniary. They extend to professional obligations as well. And I recognize that. And I think there's the MCIA plus what we would want in this panel in terms of those. I think the arbitration itself should probably be done by the Integrity Commissioner. It would be really weird for us to sit as a panel to arbitrate whether a member had a conflict or not. I think to Deputy Mayor Helmer's point, there's nothing in these terms that preclude the evolution to remote meetings or participation in the meetings. It doesn't state that they have to be physically present during those meetings. Otherwise, that would be an issue. To Mr. Wallace's comment, I think there are actually a lot of circumstances where something like a Tim Hortons or a gas station may well fall into the realm of the Urban Design Review Panel, especially in heritage districts, certain gateways and things like that. You take a look at a lot of other communities, especially where there are some significant heritage districts where something like a Tim Hortons actually has to build in conformity with the heritage guidelines of that area. So I don't think that just because they have a routine kind of cookie cutter approach that it gets to pass go. That there should be that opportunity for review where those certain circumstances as listed in these terms are there. Otherwise, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think what's recommended to be able to let the discretion of the panel determine whether they need to do a meeting review or whether it moves forward on its own. I think that totally makes sense. And I think it provides for some more streamlining of the process that I think is in everybody's interest. So good work, and thanks for bringing this forward.
Thank you, Councillor, and I think we would all be a little surprised and even disappointed if you weren't a little bit wonkish. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, Madam Chair, I'll be very quick. I just want to thank staff and the working group for the work that was put into coming up with these terms of reference. I just wanted to make a quick comment. I know these meetings are also open to the public as well, and I would think I've attended a few of them, and they're very informative and very educational, and just wanted to encourage people to come to these meetings as well.
And with that, I think we have a mover and a seconder, and I'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Next up is item 3.3, and another public participation meeting for 21 Norland Avenue. Do I have a mover to open the PPM? Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. I'll call the vote on that.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And before we begin, I'll look to the gallery to see if there is anybody here that is interested in this item 21 Norland Avenue. Are you with the applicant?
With Urban Roots London, Madam Chair.
Okay, great. So I will go to Mr. Parker and we'll have a brief presentation.
This zoning bylaw amendment was initiated by the City of London at the request of Urban Roots London, which has been operating a urban farm on the property since 2017. They've been growing food, produce on the farm for the last 2 years, and they now asked for the ability to actually sell the food from the property. Under the current zoning bylaw regulations, they can't do that. They can only grow the food under the open space zone that's applied to the property. Now, if you recall back in November 18th, you dealt with a general zoning bylaw amendment that the city initiated to come up with a definition of what's called farm gate sales. And it basically allows retail sales of produce grown on the farm on that property. We also, at that time, included farm gate sales as a permitted use in the urban reserve zone. Urban reserve, as I said in my previous presentation, is a designation and zone which allows land to remain as is until development occurs. And as part of the urban agriculture strategy, one of the goals was to allow vacant land that's just sitting there awaiting development to be farmed if possible. So this is sort of the next step. This amendment is more site-specific than the last one. The last one was more general. Just to give you some background on Urban Roots is a nonprofit organization. It's been around, as I said, for quite a while, but they've actually farmed this property since 2017. The landowner in this specific case has actually donated the land to the organization temporarily to allow them to farm it until they have possible development plans, and they're still working through those. Urban Roots at the moment sells 60% of their produce at markets, and they donate approximately 40% of their produce to groups like you, And there's other community groups that they do. Perhaps Jeremy can expand on that. But their goal is eventually to donate 1/3 of the produce, sell 1/3 at cost, and then sell the remaining third at a profit, just to cover their costs for seed and other sorts of inputs into the farming operation. Currently, they sell their produce at locations away from the property, and they want to be able to sell produce on the property to the neighborhood, to anybody that comes up and wants to buy produce right from the farm. And as I said, the current zoning allows the growing of food, but not the selling of the food. So staff have reviewed the recommendation. We've taken all the input from the neighborhood. And our recommendation is to permit the retail sale of produce on the property under the definition of farm gate sales. And as I said, this definition was approved by this committee and council in November 2019, a month ago. And as I said, this is not a general amendment. It's a site-specific amendment only. It's consistent with one of the goals of the urban agriculture strategy to make fresh produce available to the public as close as possible to where it's growing. And it's also consistent with the provincial policy statement in the London Plan. So staff are recommending this amendment, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. Are there any technical questions from committee? Mr. Councillor Turner.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, just for clarification, I think it seemed pretty clear, but access to the site for sales would come off of Norland Ave and wouldn't be like a farm stand off of Highbury, which seems kind of dangerous.
I don't believe so, but perhaps Jeremy can clarify that. But I think the intent is to have it actually, there is a small entrance there. I don't believe vehicles actually go on the property, but there is a small entrance there where they could put their farm stand, but they haven't indicated to us where that stand will be. But no, I don't believe it's going to be off Highbury Ave.
Any other technical questions? No. Now I will, thank you, Mr. Parker. I'll go to the gallery now. State your name and address, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Jacob Damstra. I'm a director with Urban Roots London, and Jeremy Harrell is a fellow director who is also in the gallery. Thank you first to the committee for allowing us the opportunity to speak, and thank you to staff for a great job with that presentation and with preparing the report. I also want to take this opportunity just to thank Jay Stanford, Manager of Environment, Fleet, and Solid Waste, who Urban Roots has worked closely with over our first 3 years to develop and grow and navigate the applicable rules and regulations in which we're operating, and state that we're looking forward to continuing to work with the Urban Agriculture Steering Committee, City Council, staff, and including Michael Fabro, the new manager of sustainability and resiliency, which is an important step that the city has taken to create that position. Mr. Parker did a great job of describing the work of Urban Roots in the report and in his presentation, so I won't belabor any points that he made, but I do want to emphasize that this recommendation will allow Urban Roots to continue its work and increase its impact in the community. Not only is it consistent with the urban agriculture strategy of the city, but it's also an issue of sustainability and resiliency in the city. It will allow Londoners to connect with where their food comes from, walk down the street or stop in after work or on their way to kids' sports or other activities to pick up fresh, organic, biodynamically farmed produce grown just minutes away, not hundreds of miles away. We also say that this is an appropriate response to Council's declaration in April that we're facing a climate emergency. The more that local, convenient, affordable options Londoners have for their produce, the lower our collective carbon footprint will be as we reduce the demand for vegetables, herbs, and fruits grown in Mexico, South America, Europe, and Asia. All of those will require additional packaging, shipping, trucking, and excess chemicals or preservatives to make their way to London. Instead, Farmgate sales at Urban Roots London will have a direct and immediate impact by bringing the concept of farm to fork directly within city limits, drastically reducing London's carbon footprint it takes to bring produce onto our grocery shelves. We'll also see indirect impacts as more Londoners visit, volunteer with, and learn about the work that Urban Roots London does, especially our students and youth, who then go off to start their own neighborhood gardens, their backyard produce gardens, or their own urban farm projects with the inspiration and knowledge they've gained from Urban Roots. Finally, I want to mention that because of our model of thirds, which Mr. Parker mentioned, every Farmgate sale that's made at our market, and I should clarify, this will be off of Norland, not off of Highbury, will also be matched by a donation of an equal produce to any of our community development partners. We're currently working with Crouch Neighborhood Resource Center, My Sister's Place. We donate into the London Food Bank and the London Vegan Food Bank. So every purchase that's made at the market is matched with a donation to an important community development partner. I'll wrap up by saying that Urban Roots is very proud of the work that we've done in our first 3 seasons, including the support and partnerships that we've developed with, to name just a few, the City of London, the London Environmental Network, Urban League London, Pillar Nonprofit Network, the Middlesex London Health Unit, through which we accept Harvest Bucks, which allows low-income Londoners to purchase fresh, affordable, organic produce with the use of Harvest Bucks. The London Food Bank, Crouch, My Sister's Place, ATN and the Old East Village Grocer, which operates a pop-up market out of their location on Dundas Street, selling our produce. Edgar and Joe's Cafe at Goodwill's Industry, which also purchases and supports and sells the food that Urban Roots grows, as well as Thames Valley District School Board, the London Christian Schools, and Growing Chefs Ontario, which send field trips of young people to visit our farm and learn about urban agriculture, sustainability, and environmental sustainability. So in closing, opening up Farmgate sales at Urban Roots will allow us to expand our direct connection with our neighbors and with all Londoners, and to strengthen the work we do with those partners. Subject to any questions from the committee, those are our comments, and we thank you for allowing us to make them.
Thank you. Does the committee have any questions for the applicant? No. I also want to say congratulations on your Pillar Community Innovation Award for Community Impact. Good job. Thank you. Are there any other members of the public here to speak to this item? I'm not seeing any, so I'll look to a mover, Councillor Keabaga, seconded by Councillor Turner, to close the public participation meeting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Councillor Keabaga. Councillor Keabaga is moving the staff recommendation. It's being seconded by Deputy Mayor Helmer. Are there any other comments or questions? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and you beat me to the punch, and the congrats for the Pillar Award, which is it was great to see. I just had a couple questions, just with respect to, so last meeting we talked a little bit about the strategy in general on evolving the urban agriculture strategy, first with the urban reserve zones, then to this site specific, and then later to home sales. Household sales, I guess, would be the possible next step to that. In sites like these, especially with respect to the OS1 where Urban Roots is operating, or maybe there's other iterations, are we kind of destined to having to do site-by-site zoning exemptions in order to support these, or is there a place that this gets sustainable and it's just happening? In the last report, it talked about zoning amendments being as much as $11,000 and being cost prohibitive to any of the applicants that might wish to use other sources of land.
Through the chair, I actually believe they probably almost will be site-specific, because a lot of these are opportunities. A lot of conversations that we've actually had with folks before are not even in OS1 zones. They in fact have been looking at brownfield sites or sites that are within neighborhoods that would have a completely different zoning. So the approach that we took in the initial amendment that we brought forward was to pre-zone all those lands where these kinds of activities could occur that we knew, because they were the UR1 lands. So those were lands that primarily were actually, in fact, in agricultural use prior to annexation. So it made sense to provide for this use within those areas. We did look at whether or not there should be other areas that we would pre-zone, but honestly, in conversations that we've had and these types of inquiries, I really believe it's probably going to be on an almost site-specific basis where these things could occur. The other thing that I would add is that I think it's really also a matter of scale. And I believe that if you recall our previous report, activities that occur within community gardens now, within parks, it's not consistent with the whole community gardens philosophy on this whole sales thing, because it's more the sharing of the folks that participate in that. So this use wouldn't be opened up there. I really think that we're probably going to capture the bulk of them at the other end of the spectrum, which is, as you characterized it, the private home sales, those kinds of things. I really think these types of scale are probably going to be not as common, and will be, as I said, much more opportunistic, where we'll be having to look at whether or not that use is a longer term use, or whether or not it would be perhaps just a temporary use in advance of future redevelopment.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett, through you, Madam Chair. That's helpful, I think, because you contemplated my other OS1 question, which was community gardens, and I think you probably mentioned it a couple of weeks ago. But it seems to be one of those things where there may be an opportunity where a community collaborates and says, we're going to have a garden sale, or maybe it's end of season and they just want to help disperse some of the produce that they might have an excess in the community garden, and say, come on down, do those kind of things. So I see those activities as being quite possible in OS1 areas, and this one being the one-off. If I think we might be best, and I'd imagine you're already on top of it, that we would watch over the course of time to see how many of these requests come forward. Now that we've done this for one applicant, it kind of puts it in our court that these would all be city sponsored zoning amendments if there were other circumstances in a similar vein. So there's some peril in that, I think, right? Because it certainly puts a lot of administrative workload. Perhaps Mr. Barrett, I give him a chance to respond to that.
Again, through the chair, most of the other OS1 potentials are probably going to be within parkland. And again, as we noted in our previous report, retail sales are a permitted use with the permission. So they are activities permitted with permission. So there's a process whereby that can happen. So I don't believe that that's going to necessitate any bylaw amendments. And again, as I said, we did look at this, and if it's of any assistance, both Mr. Parker and I do provide assistance to the Urban Ag Steering Committee, so we're sort of attuned to some of these things that might be coming up anyway. And quite honestly, we're working at how can we have these opportunities occur without having to have the city take these kinds of actions, because in the urban ag strategy, a lot of it was city get out of the way, and it's get out of the way in a regulatory sense that we brought this one forward.
Yeah, thank you. That's very helpful, and I know you've done a lot of great work on this, and there's been a lot of great support from the community on the work that's been done by the city to help. Just as a final comment, Mr. Dempster talked about the Middlesex London Health Unit and its support. I'll identify that as I'm an employee of the Middlesex Health Unit. I won't declare a conflict, as I don't believe the interest to be pecuniary. There's no financial advantage or disadvantage to me or my family as a result of any of that involvement, but I do want to flag it and identify it for committee and public.
Any other comments from committee? I'm not seeing any. So we have a mover and a seconder. I'll call the vote on that.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Perfect. Moving on to item 3.4, It's a public participation meeting for 943 Fanshawe Park Road West and 1800 Aldersbrook Gate. Do I have a mover to open that? Councillor Turner, seconded by the mayor. I'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And I suspect we have people, members of the public here for this item. Are there members here that are interested? Yes, yes, okay. So we will have a brief presentation from staff. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a zoning bylaw amendment application for a portion of the lands located at 943 Fanshawe Park Road and the property at 1800 Aldersbrook Gate. So the site is located in the Fox Hollow Planning District on the east side of Aldersbrook Gate, north of Fanshawe Park Road West. The site has an approximate frontage of 102 meters and an area of 0.69 hectares. The portion of the site subject to the rezoning is currently vacant. However, a personal service establishment currently exists to the south on the southern portion of 943 Fanshawe Park Road West. Other surrounding land uses include low-density residential to the north and to the east, and undeveloped land further to the west. So the applicant is proposing a 27-unit, 2.5-story cluster townhouse development. And as such, they are requesting to rezone a portion of the site to a residential R5 with special provision, R6 with special provision, and R7 with heightened density provisions. Those two special provisions are related to front yard setbacks, so a reduction to 2.6 meters, as well as to allow for a maximum density of 40 units per hectare. As well, the applicant is requesting to compound the same zone just described with a CC5 zone for the portion of the site to the south, forming a portion of 943 Fanshawe Park Road West, which would facilitate a shared access between the residential development and a future commercial development to the south. Through this application, the applicant is also requesting to remove a number of existing holding provisions. So the site is located within the neighborhood's place type of the London Plan and is currently designated multifamily medium-density residential in the 1989 official plan. There are currently a number of zones that apply to the subject property and are kind of separated geographically on the lands. So 1800 Aldersbrook is currently split between a residential zone with an existing special provision requiring a maximum density of 45 units per hectare. Just to clarify, that's a maximum density, or pardon me, minimum density. And then the lower portion of that property is currently zoned a CC5 zone with holding provisions. The northerly portion of 943 Fanshawe Park Road West is currently zoned a UR3 zone, as you can see on the map, while the lower portion is zoned CC5. So use intensity and form. So the proposed 2.5-story townhouse dwellings are permitted in accordance with tables 10 and 11 of the neighborhood's place type of the London Plan. Now it should be noted that these tables are currently under appeal, and so for the purpose of the review of this application, they are informative but not determinative. The proposed townhouses as well are a permitted use within the multifamily medium density residential designation of the 1989 official plan, and the proposed density of 40 units per hectare is within the maximum 75 units per hectare allowance of that designation. Furthermore, the requested 2.6 meter front yard setback would enable the buildings to be sited closer to the street, which would assist in establishing a built edge along the Aldersbrook Gate frontage. So staff is satisfied that the recommended amendment is in conformity with both the London Plan and the 1989 official plan. Now, through the circulation of this application, a number of residents raised concerns with traffic, in particular with respect to a pre-existing traffic issue caused by vehicles using the southerly stretch of Aldersbrook Gate south of Fanshawe Park Road West for cut-through traffic. So the concern was largely that the proposed development would add to this pre-existing issue. However, transportation staff have reviewed the application and commented that there is sufficient road capacity to accommodate the small increase in traffic that the proposed 27 units is projected to generate. And lastly, issue number 3 is the removal of the existing holding provisions. So there are a number of holding provisions that currently apply to the site. These holding provisions largely relate to matters that will be dealt with at a future site plan approval stage. So these speak to a building orientation plan requiring development agreements and securities, engineering matters, all which would be addressed through site plan. Lastly, H108 also requires the land to be developed in conjunction with the budding lands, which through this application, the applicant is proposing to do. So in conclusion, staff is satisfied that the recommended amendment is consistent with the provincial policy statement and is in conformity with both the in-force and effect policies of the London Plan and the 1989 official plan. And as such, it is recommended that the requested zoning bylaw amendment be approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lowry. Any technical questions from committee? I'm seeing none. Members of the public that wish to speak to this, there are 4 microphones in the gallery. Just state your name. If you're comfortable stating your address, you can do so, and you have 5 minutes.
Good. Thank you, Madam Chair. My name's Alex Mercer. I live at 1819 Aldersbrook Gate. I should point out that Aldersbrook Gate, where I live, the south side of Fanshawe Park Road, has 18 residential units at that location. It was constructed over 30 years ago, and it's about 300 feet in length. It was a short, quiet residential street surrounded by farmland, and there's been an explosion of residential and commercial units within that area, both north, south, east, and west of Aldersbrook Gate. At that time, the city officials, in my view, didn't take into account that explosion of residential and commercial units that would have an effect on Aldersbrook Gate. And there is tremendous traffic that resides in Aldersbrook Gate. Most of it is cut through, and it prepares or conditions the residents to be very frustrated to try and get some relief. We've been writing to the city officials for probably 4 years to try and get some relief. We haven't had anything at all. There's been no response other than it can handle the traffic. Well, quite frankly, they don't live in that street. Their residents and their kids can't enjoy the peace and tranquility that you should have in a residential neighborhood with such a short street. So putting this project forward is going to create more traffic problems, and more incidents of accidents at Aldersbrook Gate and Fanshawe Park Road. So I would suggest that it be put on hold and the city officials come and meet with the residents of Aldersbrook Gate to try and find solutions to the situation that we now face, because the traffic is horrendous. People come in and turn in our driveways. We can't enjoy the street, and it's certainly not in violation. It's in violation of your traffic calming policy, and which says that cut-through traffic, parties have to work together to try and come up with some solutions. And to date, we've had no satisfactory response from any of the city officials. So I would suggest very strongly that this application be put on hold, and that the city officials meet with the residents of Aldersbrook Gate to try and come up with a satisfactory resolution. We've been given the city officials a number of other alternatives that would solve some of the problems, and we haven't had any feedback or any meetings at all. We've been in touch with the mayor, we've been in touch with the councillor, Josh Morgan, and to date, it's been nothing. And it's been nothing but frustrating for the residents. We want the street back to what it was. We recognise that traffic's not going to go away, but there's a number of things that can be done to limit the increase in traffic and stop the cut-through traffic that's stopping people from enjoying the property. Thank you for your time. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Mercer. Anybody else from the public who would like to speak to this? Come to the microphone, state your name, if you're comfortable, your address, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Greg Priamo from Zelenka Priamo Limited, acting on behalf of the developer Loco Developments. Principal Bob Corbell is with me tonight. We've studied the staff report very carefully, and of course, the staff report was thorough, and we have no issues with the planning analysis that was put forward, and we'd certainly urge the committee to accept the staff's recommendation. With respect to the traffic, I can't speak to what's happening south of Fanshawe Park Road, but I do know that we're a very small development. We're only 27 units, and our traffic analysis has suggested about 12 additional cars in the peak period and less than that in the AM peak and less than that in the PM peak. And we've worked hard with city staff and with our vendor of these lands to establish a joint access arrangement between the CC lands in the front and our property, which will in the future perhaps prevent additional access being needed on Fanshawe, and maybe that will assist in the ongoing traffic issues that are prevalent in the area. But that, with those things being said, we'd certainly encourage the committee to approve the recommendations and bring it forward to council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Priamo. Any other members of the public that would like to speak to this? I'm not seeing any, so I'll look for a mover to close the public participation meeting. Moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Kayabaga. I'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
I'll go to committee for questions or comments. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, I want to thank the public for coming out, and I hear your concerns about traffic congestion as we develop throughout the City of London. I think all of us on council hear the concerns of how we move around our city as we develop. And I think it is a concern. How we move forward and deal with congestion on our roads is something that I think we need to tackle. Different types of options for mobility. Those are the challenges that we are going to be faced with. I do have a question in this area. I'm not that familiar with it, but I through you, Madam Chair, to staff around, the opening of Del McGarry and how that is helped in this area.
Through you, Madam Chair. There was a report to the Civic Works Committee on Aldersbrook Gate in 2017, and our records show that since Del McGarry was opened, there was a decrease in traffic from Aldersbrook Gate from 7,000 vehicles a day to 5,000. So that tells in that 1 year after Del McGarry was opened for traffic, 2,000 vehicles diverted into Del McGarry Road. So there was a reduction in traffic, basically.
And if I may, just following up on that, where was the reduction? Sort of, where did these cars go to? Because that's quite a bit.
So south of Fanshawe Park Road it's a big residential area, and before Del McGarry was open for traffic, the only entrance into this area is only Aldersbrook Gate. So Del McGarry Road, of course, will be another inlet and outlet to the entire area.
Any other comments or questions from committee? Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm mindful, I think there are two things going on here. One is the recommendation by staff to approve this 27 townhouse development. And on the face of it, I'm not convinced that the amount of traffic developed as a result of this is going to create additional challenges. So from that perspective, I'm comfortable. But I am very mindful of the comments, and I'm moved by what Mr. Mercer and others have said in some of the communications that we have received and the challenges about cut-through traffic and I almost want to say the abuse of the road system. And I'm wondering to what extent staff is prepared to have additional dialogue with residents to see if we can deal with some of these bigger, broader issues that are that have been noted in some of the communications we received. I'm not convinced that they're directed at this particular development, but I am mindful that the community has made, I think, some reasonable, expressed some reasonable concerns with respect to the traffic relating to Aldersbrook Gate, and I would appreciate some feedback from them.
Through you, Madam Chair, we do acknowledge the issues the residents are raising, and actually, we're just waiting to do another study for Aldersbrook Gate regarding traffic counts and road safety, and then after that, there will be a meeting with the residents to discuss the options.
So is it reasonable to assume that we'll get the feedback from staff through you, Chair, on that meeting with residents so that their concerns that have been expressed are put in front of council as well for our review?
Through you, Madam Chair, this can happen, but I'm not sure if if the mayor meant it's for next week, council, or later on, because the study will take time, weather dependent, and then we'll do that later on for sure. Yes, we can come back with a note.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's really clear from my perspective that the first part that I heard was that you were going to do the traffic study. The second part I heard was that you intend to meet with residents to have a clear airing of the broader issues. I'm not looking for next week, but I am certainly looking to ensure that the residents have a clear and fair hearing as to what the issues are, and that staff respond with recommendations accordingly.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just quickly, I recognize that sometimes the traffic issues end up coming into development, but certainly our one policy platform of reducing residential speeds help to go a fair way in traffic calming, and this is certainly highlights the importance of continuing pursuing that path. With respect to the application and development itself, I think it's quite appropriate. In fact, actually, I was happy to see that there are minimum densities applied in this circumstance. I long advocated for minimum densities. It's nice to encounter where those exist so that they can be built out in such a form. And I think its proximity to Fanshawe Park Road makes it an appropriate candidate for putting medium family density. I think it's the right size. It's gentle density, and it's appropriate in adjacency to the single-family residential just down the road. So it has my support. I'm willing. I don't know if it's been moved yet. Has it? I'm willing to move it. And, thanks.
Any other comments? Deputy Mayor Helmer.
A couple of things. That generally, I sympathize with the problem of having so many cars on the one road. I know before Dalmagary was there was a very significant number of vehicles the only way out north, with the exception of the two major arterials. And so it was carrying a huge amount of traffic, and I'm glad that opening Dalmagary has relieved some of the pressure. But still, if you look at the north end of this whole subdivision, this really big area, there's 2 exits that are mid-block on the north side, and there's 4 on the south side. And I think if the ravine was not there and the parks were not there where they are, there'd probably be 4 exits mid-block on the north side. And I think one of the takeaways for me from this particular subdivision design is that the really long curly Q road that carries all kinds of traffic, Aldersbrook, we got to stop doing that, right? Grid system, lots of different options, break it up so that you don't have these really long runs where people are going fast and there's only one way out. Because you've got the start and end of a major street like that. And I've seen people at Aldersbrook Road and the gate, they don't slow down very much when they come around the curve. And that's partly because of the way the road is designed. You know, by the time they get there, they're going very, very quickly. And the good news is we've stopped doing that. I mean, we don't have subdivisions with these kind of curly Q roads as much. We're moving away from that back to the sort of grid system that's there. It doesn't really do anything for the problem that you've got where you are, but we're trying to avoid it in the future and repeating it, so thank you for being so persistent and raising it. In terms of the actual development, I think the development is good. I think the additional impact from those vehicles on the north side is relatively minor, and I'll support the recommendation.
Any other comments or questions? I have a quick question. Does Aldersbrook Gate on the north side, does it connect right now with the other street, the Tocola Street? I believe, oh, yeah, sure, anybody that wants to answer that.
Sorry, Madam Chair. Yes, it intersects with Tocola Trail.
And have we had anybody from that subdivision, did they provide comment on this application?
No, Madam Chair, the comments were solely from those on the other side of Fanshawe Park Road West.
Thank you. If the committee doesn't mind, I'll just make a few brief comments. Thank you, Mr. Mercer and the rest of the neighborhood that came out for this meeting. I find often when, and there have been a number of issues like this in Ward 5 where one application or one initiative brought on by the city sort of stirs up an existing issue that's been simmering for a long time, and I understand that this is an opportunity or where people can raise the existing issue and call attention to it and make sense. I agree with the mayor that I don't. I'm not convinced that 27 extra units is going to exacerbate the existing problem. It's already bad enough on Aldersbrook Gate on the south side of Fanshawe Park Road. We have staff here that have made a commitment to continue to work on this, to continue to move forward. You have the mayor giving his commitment to be involved in this and has had his involvement so far in the past. We are working as a council on trying to, because it's not just your street, the speeding traffic and the cut-through traffic that tends to speed is an issue in neighborhoods throughout London. It's a really bad issue in Ward 5 on a number of streets. I have one street on the other side of Richmond that has used Aldersbrook as an example, saying, why can't we get the same kind of traffic calming measures that they've put in that side of Richmond on our side of Richmond? So it's going on everywhere. City staff are looking at ways to help solve this problem. Reducing speed limits in neighborhoods is one way that could hopefully encourage people to stay on the main arterial roads and not cut through. If they're going to cut through and if they're going to get speeding tickets on the neighborhood streets, then perhaps that will lead to them staying on the arterials if they want to drive at a faster speed and speed up their commute time. I sympathize, as Councillor Hopkins said, we all have these issues in our neighborhoods. I'm hopeful that staff will continue to work on solutions. City staff or City Council will continue to push staff to come up with solutions, and not just Aldersbrook Gate, and not just, I used to live in that neighborhood as well, so not just your neighborhood, but the neighborhoods all across the city will have relief from some of this speeding traffic. People really just need to slow down, and if it needs City Council to find enforcement or other ways to force people to slow down, then we'll hopefully get to that point. Thank you again for coming out. And we have a mover, Councillor Turner. Do we have a seconder? Deputy Mayor Helmer. So I will call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
That brings us to item 3.5, which is another public participation meeting for the application at 1395 Riverbend Road. Do I have a mover to open the PPM? Moved by the mayor, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. And I'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
So we're going to have a short presentation from Mr. Mottram on this application. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is application for a zoning bylaw amendment at 1395 Riverbend Road. These lands are a vacant parcel that are part of a block within a registered plan of subdivision. This is out in the West 5 area of the Riverbend community in the west portion of the city. And the applicant is Eve Park London GP Incorporated, and their representatives, Derek Satnick and Nick Jijak from Stantec Consulting, are also here and present tonight. The proposal is for a 80 townhouse and stacked townhouse unit development within 4 spiral-shaped buildings. The building height will gradually increase for each building from ground level at all the way up to 5 stories at the highest point of the spiral-shaped building. The development features mechanical lift and stacked parking systems and rooftop solar panels, as well as other sustainable building technologies, which will power the development with 100% renewable energy. This area of West 5 is currently under development, but there is existing developments, residential developments, including a condominium townhouse complex directly to the north of Shore Road, a public park. There is vacant lands for future commercial development to the south, vacant lands for future medium-density residential, community facilities, and a trail corridor immediately to the east, and existing single-detached dwellings to the west. This is a site concept plan that has been prepared and has been submitted, as well as there has been a site plan consultation on the plan, which you can see from an aerial view, the 4 spiral-shaped building rings, with access from a private access driveway off of Linkway Boulevard, which joins further to the east to Riverbend Road. All of the units are going to have individual entrances at grade level. And here is the architectural renderings, which give you a sort of a better visual description of the building form, the building height, the stacked parking provided in a tower at one end of the circular shaped buildings. A portion of the site with green roof, but predominantly solar, an array of solar panels over top the remainder of the roof to the top. And the residential buildings, the residential component will comprise the first 4 levels, and the 5th level actually is a common amenity area and above the stacked parking garage. The requested action is to amend the zoning bylaw from a holding residential R5, R6 special provision zone. There's actually a combination of zones, but the combination of R5 and R6 zoning, as well as a community facility zoning, and a small portion of the parcel of land is zoned open space. To change the zoning from those combinations to one residential R6 special provision zone. That doesn't change the permitted uses. The range of uses are already permitted under the current zoning, but the requested action does include special provisions for density maximum of 45 units per hectare, maximum height of 18 meters, front and side yard setbacks of 3 meters, which under the current zoning is already the setback requirement. And they have also asked that the 3 meters be applied to the side and rear yard of 3 meters, and that would apply to the easterly side yard. Vehicle parking of 1 space per unit as opposed to 1.5 spaces per unit. And then special exemptions for the mechanical parking system would include consideration of the parking space sizes and aisle requirements, both for standard and for accessible parking spaces. That visitor parking and the various sustainable development features be permitted as well. The planning policies that apply here, the London Plan place type is under the neighborhoods place type, and the official plan designation is multifamily, medium density residential, and it is also within the West 5 specific area policies. There were 5 replies received to the notice of application, and the issues raised included building height and orientation, the loss of privacy and security, bird strikes against the glass facade of the building, and concerns about increased traffic volumes on the local streets and on Oxford Street West. With respect to the building height and orientation, these buildings do vary from 0 at one end of the circular building to 5 stories at the other. And the floors 1 to 4 consist of 1, 2, and 3-level townhouses, as well as 2-level stacked townhouse units. The 5th floor, as I mentioned, is a common amenity room above the carousel parking garage. So height from the ground to the top floor is 13.2 meters, plus 3.9 meters for the proposed 5th floor club room, for a total of 17.1 meters at the highest end. And this information, it was provided on elevation plans that were provided by the applicant. There's also, there was concern about the 3 rings of buildings directly adjacent to Shore Road, and in particular, it was the middle ring, which, because of its orientation, the highest level would be adjacent to Shore Road. We've estimated that there's a 35-meter separation distance from the front facade of that building across Shore Road to the closest end walls of the townhouses to the north. We did want to also point out that there's no vehicular access points onto Shore Road, and that pedestrian paths will be provided to connect with the public sidewalks on shore. The issue of loss of privacy and the ability to view into the rear yards of the townhouses to the north, the potential impacts are, and those concerns related to the building height and views are minimized by the fact that the height of each building varies, with the highest residential units at 4 stories, and that's really the equivalent of a low-rise apartment building. The neighboring property owners to the north will be facing curvilinear buildings, and there will be substantial landscaped open space in between. And they won't be looking directly at a straight 4 or 5 story sheer massive wall. There will be enhanced landscape open space, and that will also help lessen the visual impact on privacy. With respect to the exterior lighting, the bird strikes, and concerns about additional traffic volumes, high-intensity lighting for the purposes of illuminating surface parking lots will not be required for the subject site, because the required parking will be indoors in a parking structure. The private access road and the access points into the mechanical parking garage will be illuminated, and they can be controlled, as well as exterior lighting for walkways and building entrances will be controlled. Light pollution emanating from the interior living spaces through the glass exterior was one of the concerns, but this can also be controlled by dwelling occupants. A staff report concerning the issue of bird-friendly development was tabled with the Planning and Environment Committee last month, and so there are recommendations for amendments to the site plan control bylaw. There is no direct access to either Shore Road or West Elborn, so the proposed density will not contribute significantly to traffic volumes. So our recommendation is for approval of the residential special provision zone. It's consistent with the provincial policy statement, conforms with the London plan, the official plan, and the West 5 specific area policies. It incorporates sustainable building technologies and innovation and advancements in green development. And the uses, as I had mentioned, are already permitted within the current zoning, and the recommended special provisions, including increased density and height and reduced parking rates, are considered appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Mottram. Any technical questions from committee? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just really quickly through to staff, I couldn't quite see the delineation in the report of where the OS1 that is being rezoned is.
Certainly, I can clarify that. A small portion of the northwesterly corner of the site is zoned OS1. I believe it's only in the area of about 2,000 or 3,000 square meters. It is a remnant open space. It was originally planned as part of a stormwater management facility, which was to extend from Oxford Street all the way north to Shore Road in a 25-meter corridor along that side of West Elborn. When the functional designs were done for the stormwater management facilities, it turned out that the northerly portion of the corridor was not required for the conveyance channel and infiltration. So that was left as remnant open space. So that's the portion that we're talking about here.
Thank you.
Any other technical questions? No. Is the applicant here? I hear there's lots of representatives of the applicant. I wonder if one, okay, come forward. Welcome. You have 5 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. I had another couple of slides that I was hoping to share. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. Thank you. That's great. Thanks very much. Okay, I'll keep this brief and then just make myself available for questions. But and actually, Mr. Mottram's already covered basically everything that was on this slide, but I had met with several staff from different departments for advice prior to, obviously the development's a little unique. So we've tried to get advice along the way from many of the city departments to make sure that we're not doing anything we shouldn't do or being confused in any way. So I will say one thing that came up is bike ratios. We've been encouraged to maximize bike usage in this site. We've already put quite an effort into active transportation thinking, and our whole emphasis is live in a park and not a parking lot. So we're well connected with all of the trails around us. There's lots of landscaping on the site and so on. We have 74 bike stalls for 80 residents. I was privileged to be one of the authors of the LEAD program, several versions of the LEAD program nationally. So I would suggest this is actually pretty high compared to what we would expect from usage, but we think that's a good thing, and we'll sort of promote that and encourage that. And we had been encouraged to consider 1-to-1. If you'd like to ask me during the questions, I'll explain why we think that's excessive, but we were glad to put 74 spaces in there at least. For broader context, what you see here is the master plan for West 5. This is not us, this is Sifton, all credit to them. We're very proud to be part of what's going on there, but we put some very deliberate effort into making sure we were not repeating or being redundant with anything that's there. We want it to be complementary. So there's some things that we are specifically not, and we tried to respect those things around us and work with them. But for example, there's a 50-acre park right north of us. We want people to have access to that. We don't need park uses on our site. So we purposeful landscaping instead, that kind of thing. And we have, although we put some effort into accessibility, and we are right close to a retirement facility that is much better suited to that. So our expectation is we may have families living in our space, which will access and use that facility for other family members. So we want us to be visitable, but we don't necessarily have ideally designed accessible units for people who really would be better served in that building. Again, just an example. So there's a bunch of things we're not, but we're very blessed to be so close to the rest of what West 5 is and will be. Lots of good discussion we could have there. Here is a quick visual of what this concept is, because it is different. And the goal was to get rid of driveways and cars, which of course we can't completely get rid of, but we did our best. And the concept is very much around active transportation and providing a living experience that is not car-centric. It's supposed to be pedestrian-centric. So you do have to walk past lots of beautiful growing things to be able to get to your front door. The distance to walk is very comparable with a lot of other townhome developments in town. And in other examples, we pulled from other areas. But really, the goal was to make sure we hid the cars, but not too far away. And then the idea would be that you could pull up the car in front of the garage. This is going to take us a little longer yet to finish, but you pull up the car in front of the garage, drop off the car, you get out with your kids and groceries and walk home and hit a button on your phone and the car parks itself in the garage. And when you come out of your house later, you can call it from your phone and it'll park in the same place and wait for you. So there's some technical things we're doing that are not your concern, but that illuminates part of why we're looking at the layout we are. That really we don't want the cars to be in the middle of everything. We want you to be in the middle of everything, that idea. So the cars are all hidden in the garage. We've done lots of work with these providers of these garage technologies to make sure that this is appropriate. And Mr. Mottram has been a good advisor to us. And we have been asked repeatedly why the round shape and why the relation between the four shapes. It's a long story. I'll just hit the highlights. But the highlights are all of these different things. We looked a lot in this exploration of net zero energy. We looked a lot at how to maximize the benefit of our solar panels. So we did a whole big study. I'll spare you the details. But we were looking for what is the optimal orientation for that sloped roof to actually get really good solar yield. Separate, quite separate from that, we worked with the Windy test facility from Western on the east end of town. I'm sure some of you are very familiar with it. We commissioned them to do a wind study for us about what the optimal orientation will be to make sure we don't bury anybody's front door in snow, because these things are round and we don't want the snow accumulating in the wrong place. So very interesting results from them. And then very practically, fire and garbage trucks have to get in there. So just where the roads need to be if everyone's going to need to be able to get their garbage out and be rescuable, serviceable from our emergency service and emergency responders. So the layout that we have is the optimized combined layout with all of those considerations. We were actually very fortunate that most of those recommendations came back within 5 degrees of each other, so, which I have never seen happen before. So we're really happy that it actually lined up really well. And there's lots of other science behind that, but just to hit the highlights, that's why the orientation. This was actually really helpful feedback we got from one of the local residents. It expressed some things we had already thought about. Excuse the resolution, I screen captured that off of the staff report. So there's more reference to this same document in the staff report. I did want to comment very briefly though on views because things like shading affect our solar. So we study that all the time for solar reasons. And at this latitude on the Earth, roughly the same latitude that you are on the globe, 42nd meridian, 45 degrees, and 35-meter distance from us to the neighbors means we would have to be 35 meters tall to create any shading impact on them at all, which we're clearly not. So there will be no shading impact. I should clarify the red box there is the only amenity space. We have one to share among the 4 clusters. There's not one on top of all of these, only one to share. And that is our highest space. Eyeballs in that space will be at about the 14, 15 meter level. The highest eyeballs otherwise will be 11 meters, so they won't see anything in any of the neighbors' yards at all. They'll see the fences maybe, and hopefully just the trees that we put around them. But the 5th story will have nice views into the stormwater feature, which is what we want. So, and that was really the most meaningful things that I could contribute to the discussion tonight. Otherwise, there's lots of discussion we are prepared to have, and if you have any questions, I'll do my best to entertain those when you're ready.
Thank you. Any questions of the applicant? No. Any members of the public that would like to speak to this matter? Oh, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Maureen Zenti from Sifton Properties, and we are the owner and developer of West 5, and I just wanted to indicate that Sifton is in full support of the zoning bylaw amendment. We feel that what S2E is proposing is fully in keeping with the very innovative and sustainable nature and vision and goals that we have for West 5.
Thank you. Right here, go ahead, go to the microphone, sir. Your name, if you're comfortable, give us your address, and then you have 5 minutes.
Sure, it's Dave Cooker. I'm at 1921 Ashgrove Court, so I'm diagonal to this development. And first off, yes, when we purchased our home not too long ago, it was when West 5 was planned, so we were fully aware of what was going to be happening there. And this does go with the spirit of the West 5, what they're going for. What the 2 concerns I have is the height and the noise. So the first one with the height, when we bought our place, I did review the zoning of the area and the 12 meters across there. And now with a 50% increase, that is a pretty big thing. When the 3 corners are basically 2-story buildings and you come out and now there's going to be a 5-story building over there. And yes, I do know it's gradual, but if you do look at the pictures, the majority of it is over the 4 stories up to the 5. And I just feel that they could have gone, with all those benefits that this does bring, I don't, why did it have to be 5 stories? And with the zoning amendment, along with the height, that area has gone through a lot of zoning amendments, and I just wonder how many are there going to be and who's reviewing the area? Because there's been a lot of them in a short period of time. We had 8725, 8924, 9115, and now this. So the one was with the retirement residence, which was brought up. That had a zoning amendment, and it was in regards to also to the height. And there was concerns on Shore Road with the height of that, and now there's the height of this. There's a school down Shore Road, kids walking, and now there's going to be these taller buildings along that road with traffic. So 17.1 meters out of the 18 is a big change from 12 meters max before. The other one was the noise. I know there was a noise study, but what I can tell from it is that it was just data provided from the manufacturer, and conveniently the evening maximums were basically right at the max. The nighttime was right at the maximum. So my question is after this which was the maximum for night is 45 decibels, and the predicted was 45 or 44. So it's based on data from the manufacturer. So my question is when I'm out at night in my backyard at a fire or whatever, am I going to hear humming from these elevators? Is there going to be a follow-up study of what in actual real life the noise that this is going to make? So those are my 2 concerns. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any other members of the public here? Yep, go ahead.
Hi, my name's James Aiken. I'm the owner of Unit 93 on 2040 Shore Road. I'm pretty sure it's the closest unit on the condominiums to Block C. And pretty much my focus is on Block C, which is the unit just south of 2040 Shore Road, basically. I guess our biggest concern is purely a privacy factor. We moved in about 6 months ago into the unit, obviously not knowing about what was going to come across the road. And I feel I'm in automation, so I'm happy with the development. I think it'll be good for the area. Purely Block C, from a standpoint of privacy, we've expanded our yard area. We feel given 4 to 5 stories, it's pretty easy to see straight down into our yard. I think with 7 meters of landscape space between the units and Shore Road, I don't feel there's enough space there to landscape enough to actually block a view from, the clubhouse directly into our yard. I think you mentioned a unit of about 35 meters to our fence. So that's probably the biggest factor. I guess my question is, if we go ahead with this, why couldn't we rotate Block C by 180 degrees, pretty much putting it in line with the same orientation as Block D, from a solar point of view and angles of the sun onto the units, theoretically should be exactly the same and mitigate the factors of the privacy of myself and my neighbors around me. That's about it.
Thank you, Mr. Aiken. Any other members of the public? Go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Mark McConnell. I'm currently a resident of Ward 9, and I live in the Riverbend community, approximately 30 paces from the address plan for rezoning. Sorry, that's not more accurate. After the past 50 years of living and working in the City of London, I have been a resident of Oak Ridge, Northridge, Masonville, Woodfield, Old North, and now, the past 5 years, Byron Riverbend. I want to thank the Planning and Environmental Committee for their hard work and for listening to the concerns of their citizens. My comments will be somewhat brief. I have no disagreement with the city wishing to increase the sustainable development features, including a green roof, wall treatments, electric vehicles, charging stations, and rooftops, solar collectors. My disagreement is with the changes to the zoning at 1395 Riverbend Road, allowing for a much higher density housing from 35 units per hectare to a density of 45, and I strongly disagree with increasing the maximum height allowance to 18 meters from the current 12 meters. I don't believe a 50% increase in the height from 40 feet to just under 60 feet is warrantable in that area. The height of these buildings is too much for this particular section of land. The buildings would not look in keeping with the surrounding residential area. The residents directly to the west of these buildings are single detached houses of no more than 2 stories above ground. Directly to the north are 2-story townhouses. None of these structures is anywhere near the 5 stories in height these new buildings would extend. As a for instance, the headquarters of Sifton Properties at Riverbend and Oxford is no more than 3 stories tall. And a similar area to the east of this property at the corner of Shore Road and Keynes Road holds the McCormick Retirement Home. It is a 3-story low-rise building with a maximum height, I believe, of just over 12 meters. That is more in keeping with the aesthetics of this neighborhood. I have seen the renderings on the SE2 website for the Eve Park development, and it's very telling to me that of the 4 pictures showing for these buildings, only 1 shows the actual 5-story rendering, and the rest are its 3-story designs. It's also a pretty disingenuous mix of clip art and alterations, and it does not look at all harmonious in this particular neighborhood. It is anything but. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McConnell. Any other members of the public here for this? I'm not seeing any more hands going up, so I will look to the committee to close the public participation meeting. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Keabaga, and we will vote on that. So before we start with discussion, there were 3 questions from the members of the public. I wonder if staff are ready to answer those questions. What I have are a concern and a question about how many more zoning amendments in the area that residents can expect. Another was, will the noise generated from these buildings disturb the neighbors? And I believe it's noise related to electrical equipment. And the third one is a question about whether Block C could be rotated to improve privacy for the neighbors.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll try to address the questions in the context that this is a block of land in a subdivision which is planned within the West 5 specific area policies, and that did provide for the planning basis for developments that in this case for West 5 was to be built out over a long term of 15 years. So there is provisions or recognition in the policies that there needs to be some flexibility to be able to accommodate the demand for the development from a number of perspectives here. And so that's why there is a combination of zones in place right now with a broad range of uses. And it is, with these zones do provide for not just a mix and range of uses, but also for the building that is within a medium density form of development, which is what the designation is under the official plan and West 5 policies, multifamily medium density residential. So we staff support the recommendation for the height. We don't feel that it is a significant increase. It is within the keeping of a low-rise residential building, which is permitted under the policies. With respect to the noise and the noise study, this was requested, and it would be required, particularly with when we get into the site plan review, and the recommendations for sound and noise mitigation would be incorporated into the site planning and the building permit. Perhaps Mr. Satnick could speak a little bit further about the design for the parking structure and how that will be, how noise will be addressed that way. And then you had a question with respect to how many more zonings. Yes, there was the senior citizens and the retirement home did go through a zoning amendment application to increase the height, and then it was found that the building could be designed in such a way as to increase the number of floors again. But I don't anticipate that there will be any further zoning amendments, but who knows? The applicants could come at any time, and that's the process.
Through the chair. Just to respond to the noise question, I believe was for me. So the noise study that we did was specifically on the parking systems, because that's really the only noise generator. Yeah, otherwise they're townhomes. And what we found in the parking systems, no, my slides are closed. The layout diagram will show you that most of the parking structures actually face inward to the development. So the noise study was particularly focused on the noise receptors which are closest, which is the residents within the community yet to be built. So all the numbers that are included in there are numbers for our residents. Any other resident that's outside of the development would have much, much quieter. The noise diminishes very quickly. It's a second order magnitude equation, so they're not going to hear anything outside of our development. But strictly speaking, the noise that you'd experience is only in the parking systems. I'll turn it on when he's ready. And the people in the neighborhood will only hear those noises when the carousels are rotating, moving cars, which is only going to happen in the morning when they're off to work and in the evening when they're back from work. And our parking study demonstrated numbers for vehicles moving and how quickly is that going to happen and all that kind of thing. So what they found is that it's well within acceptable limits in all cases. And again, that's for the people living in the middle of Eve Park, right beside the garages. People outside of the community will barely hear anything, if ever.
So basically, the noise studies that were done were how the noise would affect the people living in the future building, and so the noise that would be generated would be even less for people in the area. Okay.
Yeah, the biggest concern is the person who lives behind the wall for the parking systems. So that's where we were looking.
Okay, so there was a question as well about, and I know you spoke about the orientation of the buildings, but there was a question specifically about rotating Block C, if it would be possible to rotate Block C in order to improve privacy for the nearest residents.
The short answer is no, we wouldn't be able to get a fire truck in. So yeah, so the optimized layouts that we've proposed are optimized. We have like 5 degrees wiggle in that to be able to change really anything. And that was for solar orientation, for wind, and for snow. I appreciate the comment. If we were to flip it 180 degrees, all the solar panels would have opposite slope to what they have right now. It would actually be quite detrimental. But even still, the bigger issue is fire trucks. So, yeah.
Thank you. And just to reiterate what staff said about future zoning amendments, there is a process, and staff don't control the process of applications. They go through the system that is basically part of provincial legislation. When a planning application is received, it has to go through a very specific process of vetting through staff and then a decision made by City Council. It's part of the Provincial Planning Act, actually. So there really is no control of applications that are that somebody decides to submit for a development that they may or may not want to have. But as Mr. Mottram said, it seems like the area is being quite built out. So I think we're nearing the end of what changes can take place on the land there. But now I'm going to go to committee for discussion, debate. Any questions, comments? Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much for the public to come out and express your concerns, comments. As the council of the ward, I've heard the concerns, and I know they were addressed by the applicant and by staff. I do have a question regarding the construction route and how that's going to work with all the development in the area. And Shore Road being a school and how we monitor that area is a concern. And just wondering if we can have a little bit more information on how Shore Road will be used through the construction process.
Through you, Madam Chair. The construction will be finalized and determined through the site plan process and the development agreement, but it's unlikely that any construction traffic will be utilizing Shore Road. It likely will be, most of the access will be through the Linkway and through the private road that's a part of this development.
Thank you. And I know there was a comment, and I've heard a number of comments about the density that we're going from 35 units per hectare up to 45. And when I read this recommendation, I was surprised it was so low because I know there's a lot of development that's going on that is a lot higher in the West 5 development. And I appreciate the comments. I know it's a challenge as we proceed with traffic and moving in this area with this development, but I am supportive of this development for a number of reasons. And one of the reasons is that it really is, it meets all the W5 smart community, sustainable net zero development. To me, that is very important, that any kind of development here meets that criteria. And if you go into the West 5 site, you can see how that community is projected to be developed in the next, we're probably down to 8 years now, but it is going to be all developed. It's going to have its challenges as we move around. The sustainable part with the green roofs, the wall treatments, the naturalization of the landscaping in this area. I think there's so many unique opportunities with this development. The car sharing, the carpooling, hopefully that will have some effect as we move in this area. We have a lot of traffic coming in from Kilworth and Komoka that just adds to the congestion as well. The height, heard for sure the height above the carousel, but the height is sort of at its lowest point with the community center being on that 5th floor. I know there were changes in the plans, and I saw Plan 2 for, say, 4 stories a while ago. And I think as this application went through the process, it changed and moved around. The technology, I think, is a really big part of technology and housing all coming together. I hope, if anything, this happens. And I would like to see it happening soon as well. I would like to ask the committee, I know I haven't heard your comments, but I'd just like to make a suggestion that I would like to, we'll be asking for an amendment to be added based on the Cycling Advisory Committee report that was received by council a while back about biking. I know the applicant touched upon it in his presentation. Thank you for that. But how we accommodate the parking of bicycles, given this uniqueness of how we carpool and car share, that we should look at biking. And I've got that amendment there, and I'll just sort of read it out as a B to this recommendation that the site plan authority be requested to consider those comments provided by the provided in the 10th report by the Cycling Advisory Group, which is to look at how bikes are going to be parked, and then also to report back to the cycling group. So with that, again, I want to thank the community for coming out. I hear your concerns and really think it's really important that the committee, staff, and everyone hears your concerns too. So thank you for that.
So the counselor is moving the staff recommendation, which is an A, and then the counselor is adding a B, that the site plan authority consider the comments from the cycling advisory committee. There's more words than that, but that's the gist of it. Are there any other comments or questions from committee? Deputy Mayor.
I just wanted to say, we've seen a lot of interesting things in this part of London with what's going on at West 5. I've been out to see some of the buildings that have gone up already, and this one, when I saw the renderings, I mean, it kind of remind me of like Bjarke Engel's group kind of design, like you're just seeing stuff that just doesn't exist in London anywhere. Like, this is very interesting, the kind of sloping of the roof and how we're going to fit all this stuff together. And I think it's really interesting. I think it paved the way for some really cool developments in other parts of the city. As people see what's possible, they drive by it, they see it. They can start seeing, like I could see that in other parts of town. And I think you can show that it's not just successful, but that people are going to want to live there, right? That they want this kind of living space, that they want to have this kind of integration, and they want to reduce their costs, you know, on energy side as much as they possibly can. So I think it's really promising. I think that we could see more things like that. The walking up onto the roof is probably the most remarkable part of it, but I think you can see when you look at the planning that goes into the orientation of the buildings, how precise you have to be and how to fit these things together. And I think it sounds like the process has been pretty smooth in terms of working through the design with the applicant and trying to work through all of that. I think being first comes with some struggles because you're trying to go through processes that are not necessarily designed for buildings that have to be positioned a certain way for the sun and for other reasons. And I hope that that gets smoother and smoother as we see more applications like this.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a very interesting application. What I think I am most intrigued about is the synergies that come out of this. In fact, that West 5 started with some innovative approaches, and that another developer is taking a look and say, here's an opportunity for us to put something beside it and challenge some paradigms a little bit. I recognize the concerns that were expressed by the community. I think one of the things that's going to be challenging, and we face this as a committee each time, is that as there's areas for growth, that zoning is fairly mutable. It's constantly changing. The one gentleman referred to how frequently they were getting notices of zoning amendments, and where you have vacant lands, that's going to happen a lot as the concepts for the build out start to evolve over time. So what's proposed at a certain time may not be what ends up being the final form that's built unless it was had been brought forward and either locked in through bonusing or that somebody decided to move forward and develop what had been put forward there. Where we find our guidance comes from the official plan and our general statements and concepts of where density occurs, how much density, and how it juxtaposes against adjacent land uses. 5 stories is not a massive step up from single family and 2-story residential. It's fairly consistent and generally accepted that those are compatible land uses, especially where there's a street separating them. So in this circumstance, the proposal is rather appropriate. At its maximum, it's five stories, which is a really interesting part to this because it's not a consistent 5 stories through the whole building. It kind of averages at 2.5, I guess, which is much different than anything that we've taken a look at through other policies. The energy use components to this, some novel approaches to some of the engineering, space use. The general things that we're aiming for in this city are how do we improve density, how do we improve our land use, how do we do it in a way that's sensitive to other adjacent land uses, and the only limitation I have about even West 5 is it's just so far out from the core of the city. These are the kind of things that would be fascinating to have seen the city evolve that way in the core, but perhaps there's some really interesting infill opportunities and learnings that come out of a kind of a demo site such as this. So I'm supportive of the application. I think the special provisions that are being sought are appropriate, not overly onerous to adjacent properties, and it has my support.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to follow up on Councillor Hopkins' suggestion of an amendment. I don't believe it's been seconded yet, but if I understand where she's looking to take this is to understand how this development works through the lens of the Cycling Advisory Committee, and I wonder if that, before we would accept the amendment, just get some feedback from staff as to whether that's been considered already, just so we can understand better whether it's whether an amendment is appropriate or necessary for the purpose.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just in response to the Cycling Advisory Committee, that staff did not receive a response to that. I have had a discussion with Councillor Hopkins, however, who was involved with the advisory committee and advised about this interest in the provision for long-term cycling storage. And our response was that the applicants are clearly prepared to provide in excess of what the zoning bylaw would require for long-term bicycle storage here. In fact, the bicycle storage rate is 0.75 spaces per unit, and that's for apartment buildings, but actually for townhouses and stacked townhouses, there is no requirement for bicycle parking storage.
Mr. Mayor?
Well, I'm just also note that what I heard in this report is there were 74 bike stalls as well. So I'm not sure, and perhaps the councillor, if it's necessary to go beyond this, just could explain, just so we can either deal with this as an appropriate addendum to the bylaw recommendation, or whether it's felt that the treatment of this has been appropriately handled.
Councillor Hopkins, do you want to address that?
Yes, I guess the reason I'm suggesting it be added is that it was a request from the Cycling Advisory Committee to get a report back to them to see if they would look at extra bicycle storage. And then, whatever that my intent is that as this goes through the site plan process, the applicant and staff look at that, and then it would be up to staff, civic administration. It wouldn't come back to planning, that it would go back as a report to the Cycling Advisory Group. I think in this case, this is quite a unique application. And for me, when I read the request in the Cycling Advisory report, was that they wanted to know as a follow-up what happened with this application, given the uniqueness, and they are looking at a number of options with carpooling, and so it just seemed the right thing to do. And from what I understand, the applicant does not have a problem with that as well.
Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
I'm not sure if that was a question that the councillor was asking the applicant, perhaps, just so we can clarify what we're going to be voting on, assuming that it gets to a vote.
So there was a report of the Cycling Advisory Committee, the 10th report, and there were a number of comments and suggestions that the advisory committee made. And the report was referred to civic administration for consideration and action. So I think Councillor Hopkins is just asking that staff and considering at the site plan stage, as they move through this process, that they also consider the Cycling Advisory Committee's recommendations and comments as they move through site plan. I don't believe that it is onerous. If Mr. Pompili, you'd like to comment on that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, those comments were not received by staff prior to this report being prepared. Notwithstanding, it is appropriate for, and we will have some consideration during the site plan review process for bicycle parking. I believe there's been discussions with the applicant, and they're amenable to including provisions for bicycle parking. So I don't see that as an issue.
Any other comments, questions? Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, and I just wanted to follow up again, because I know the public is here and a few concerns came from the height. And I understand that that fifth floor, and Councillor Turner mentioned that it's just not the whole building that is the fifth floor. It goes around and starts at one and goes up to the fifth. And that fifth floor is not, it's a common room that sits above the parking. So it's not, people won't be looking down at other properties the whole time. It's not a living space. It's a common room that would sit on that fifth floor. I just wanted to add that for clarification. I don't know if that makes it makes it more confusing, but I'll leave it at that.
I actually have a question about that that common space. So the applicant spoke and said that only one of the buildings has the common room. So do all four of the buildings have the fifth floor, or only the one with the common space?
There is a fifth floor to the structure in all five, but 3 of the 4, that's the parking garage. It's the parapet on the side of the parking garage. On the fourth, the middle one, we've actually reduced the height of the parking in order to create space for the amenity space on the fifth. So the fifth floor really isn't a floor except in one of the buildings. In the other buildings, it's only a parapet, and it slopes down towards grade, as has already been discussed. So yeah, the average height of the building is 3.5 stories, but there is a tall point, but the tall point is a parapet.
Wonderful. So in only one of the buildings is there inhabitable or people space on the fifth floor, and sorry, just for clarification, which of, could you I think you did tell us at one point, but which one of the buildings has the amenity space?
So it's where I highlighted right here. It's very much buried in the middle of the site. So, and notwithstanding that we want to be good neighbors, but we're not designing it as much for the neighbors as we are for the people living within the development, right? So where that amenity space is for the use of the people who live inside the community. So it's right in the middle. We want it where it's going to be of most benefit to the people living there. So yeah, in the middle where it has a view over the water, not over the neighbors. I mean, the neighbors aren't as interesting as the water feature is, and we don't want them staring at us either. So it's one of those tensions. We tried to keep it turned away from everyone else.
Very good. Thank you very much for that information and that clarification. Any other questions or comments? So it's been moved by Councillor Hopkins with a little itty bitty amendment. Is there a seconder? Deputy Mayor Helmer. Councillor Turner.
Yep, just quick clarification. So the amendment that Councillor Hopkins proposes is just something that's for consideration by site plan as it goes through in the approval authority. It's not a binding, but it's, hey, can we work through this as any of the public comments were forwarded to site plan. Good, thank you.
Okay, so we can vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And I also wanted to thank the people for coming out and giving us your comments, insight. And we'll move to item 3.6, which is another public participation meeting regarding an application at 1018 and 1028 Gainsborough Road. Can I have a mover to open that? Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Kabaga. We'll vote on that.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And before we begin, I'm wondering, are there any members of the public in the gallery looking to speak to this item, the 1018 and 1028 Gainsborough Road? Yes, so one is the applicant for sure, and the others are members of the public. So, Mr. Mottram, if we could have a brief presentation on that, I would appreciate that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We'll try to make this as brief as possible, but it is a zoning bylaw amendment application by Copia Developments on 1018 and 1028 Gainsborough Road in Hyde Park. And the proposal is for a 6-story mixed-use building consisting of ground floor retail, second floor office, and residential units above on the 3rd to 6th floors. As well as, that's on the front portion of the property. On the rear portion, 12-story residential apartment building consisting of 182 units. And it also includes a component for affordable housing. So 18 affordable rental units consisting of 16 one-bedroom and 2 two-bedroom units are proposed within that 12-story building. Parking should be provided both on surface, but the majority of parking will be underground parking. This is a site concept plan that identifies the 2 buildings, with Building A being the mixed-use building located right up at the front on Gainsborough Road, and as well as the 12-story building on the rear portion of the site. And you have a bit of your surface parking behind Building A in the space between the 2 buildings. But I also wanted to point out that there is an indication here of the approximate location of a private laneway for public access. And that was something that came out of the Hyde Park Community Plan for all of the lands to be developed along Gainsborough Road and Hyde Park Road. This is gives you a visual representation of these renderings of the buildings to give you an idea of the building form, and as well as the idea of a Main Street development here, and that's the intent of the planning policies in the Hyde Park Community Plan, and that's what the 6-story building was intended to do, with commercial and retail on the ground floor. The amendment to the zoning is for the front portion to change the zoning from a holding business district commercial to another business district commercial zone with special provisions for a density of 97 units per hectare and a maximum height of 25 meters. The rear portion is currently zoned urban reserved. But the requested zone is for a residential R9 zone, and that's a zoning that does permit apartment buildings with a height of 43.5 meters, east side yard setback 11.2 meters, west side yard setback 2.2 meters, and a density of 392 units per hectare, just on that one portion, on the rear portion of the site. And density bonusing is also being sought here for the provision of affordable housing, the underground parking, and common open amenity area. The London plan place types are Main Street and neighborhoods. The official plan designation is Main Street Commercial Corridor along Gainsborough Road, and multifamily high-density residential. The Hyde Park Community Plan also identifies these lands as being within the business district and high-density residential designations. So three replies were received to the public notice, and the issues were the potential impacts of increased traffic volumes, that the area lacks public transit, and that a 12-story building will block the views and impact privacy for adjacent property owners. The traffic impact assessment has been provided. It accompanied the application, and I understand from speaking with transportation that they have accepted the TIA. The intersection of Hyde Park and Gainesville, as far as the forecasted traffic volumes, will operate at acceptable levels of service. There was concern identified in the TIA with the left turn movements on Hyde Park Road at that intersection, but remedial measures can be put in place to deal with that. There also has recently installed traffic signals at the intersection of Hyde Park Road and South Carriage Road, which have been long awaited for. And the Transportation Division also indicated that there should be a identified shared access with the property to the east. So at such time as that develops, that there will be a proper access consistent with the city's access management guidelines on arterial roads. As far as public transit and loss of use and the privacy issues, the development is intended to be pedestrian-oriented and supportive of active transportation and public transit. There is London Transit bus routes along Hyde Park Road, regularly scheduled. The proposed 12-story apartment building is located further to the west of a existing apartment building at 1030 Coronation Drive, and it will not be directly in line with the north-facing views of that apartment building. Apartment buildings of similar heights are currently being developed in the immediate area to the south and southwest. And we will be proposing in our recommendation the additional buffering, trees, and a vegetation planting strip along the rear property boundary to buffer the adjacent residential uses to the south, which consist of townhouses. So the recommendation is for approval of the zoning amendments, as well as a city-initiated amendment to add a specific policy to the London plan to permit the apartment building with the specific height up to 12 stories and maximum density of 392 units per hectare. It's consistent with the provincial policy statement, conforms with the official plan, the Hyde Park Community Plan, and the London Plan, subject to the recommended special policy to facilitate the proposed bonus zoning. The recommended bonus zone is appropriate to allow for increased density in return for affordable housing, and it is supported by Housing Development Corporation of London, HDC. Pedestrian connections to Gainsborough Road, the parking and drive aisle configurations, screening and buffering, the public access laneway, and building orientation will be viewed in further detail through the site plan approval process. So if there are any questions, Madam Chair?
Thank you, Mr. Mottram. Any technical questions for staff? No. Is the applicant prepared to speak, wanting to speak? Come to the microphone.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Harry Frusios. I'm with Salinka Priamo Limited. I'm here today on behalf of Copia Developments for this application. I have not much to say, Madam Chair. I just wanted to thank staff again for their efforts in bringing this recommendation forward that we're happy with and we support. I wanted to thank the HDC for working with our client to come up with an appropriate bonusing structure for provide affordable housing within the development. And also want to thank Councillor Morgan and the public for attending the open house on June 27th. It was well attended and there was very positive comments and we thank them for that. But with that, Madam Chair, I'm open to any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frusios. Any questions for the applicant? I'm seeing none. Thank you. Members of the public, if you'd like to come forward, state your name, if you're comfortable giving your address, and then you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. My name is Mary Dowds. I live at 1030 Coronation Drive, which is the condominium building directly to the southeast of this proposed development. I did send an email when I first received notice of this public meeting. It was scheduled to, the original meeting was scheduled to be on the same night as our federal election, and I don't know if that's why it was bumped to today. And I'm not sure if my email ever made its way along to you people. I did express my concerns. It's interesting to me, the sequence of applications this evening. The first one that I heard when I first arrived addressed the concerns around Aldersbrook Gate and the traffic congestion in the entire northwest area. So I know that all of you are aware of that. The next application regarded as quote-unquote smart community, and Councillor Hopkins and Turner and others spoke glowingly about the features of that developing smart community. With an application such as this for rezoning, if it is approved, my community, I don't think we could cling even to a D-. This is a really, really bad idea. It's a lovely building and a lovely plan, and it is an abhorrent location for such a development. It is a stone's throw, I would say less than 150 meters from the already very congested intersection of Gainsborough Road and Hyde Park Road. Gainsborough, I don't think, was ever developed to accommodate a high-rise development such as this. It's 12-story residential plus a mixed-use multi-story building at the front, and it is right at an already very, very congested intersection. And I know that all of you are very aware of the increasing problems with congestion. I live at the top of 1030 Coronation Drive, and I look directly down at the intersection, and I witness every day the increase in traffic along Hyde Park Road and Gainsborough Road, and I see some alarming things. We have been very, very fortunate and to have the long-awaited traffic controls recently installed at South Carriage Road and Hyde Park Road, which is directly to the southwest of this proposed development. It is just south of the Gainsborough and Hyde Park intersection. I witnessed numerous car accidents at that intersection due to the increasing volume and alarming speed of traffic traveling north and south along Hyde Park Road. And I recall this past summer, just before the work started at South Carriage Road and Hyde Park Road, I was coming home and waiting to turn left onto South Carriage Road. I was traveling south on Hyde Park, waiting to turn left, and the car that was attempting to turn left onto South Carriage Road ahead of me was involved in a collision with a northbound vehicle speeding along Hyde Park Road. And it was interesting that the very next morning, the work began to erect the traffic control poles for the lights and so on at that intersection. So it seems that development in the area is moving at a really, really rampant pace, but infrastructure, traffic controls, as we heard, we just heard about the Riverbend Smart Community and our clinging to maybe a D- community. Right before that, we heard about the traffic problems at Aldersbrook Road, Aldersbrook Gate. That is in my neighborhood. That is just to the north of Gainsborough Road. And to put this high-density, high-rise development and a mixed-use development right at the front, right on Gainsborough Road, at that already intensely congested area is foolhardy at best. And I know every one of you know about the problems of traffic that are rapidly increasing in this area. I heard 2 agenda items prior to this one. I heard a very, very eloquent statement about the traffic concerns by a resident of the Aldersbrook Gate area. You know what's going on in that area, and to approve this rezoning application is utterly foolhardy. So let's think about the smart, innovative developments that are happening at W5, and maybe we can aspire to think ahead, to be forward-thinking, innovative, and create other smart communities. This is absolutely the opposite. So I urge you to consider that. Also, from my point of view, one of the items that Mr. Mottram just mentioned is that
you're at 5 minutes, ma'am.
Thank you. This development does not impede, it's not in direct line with the northward facing views. I happen to be at the northwest corner up at the top of 1030 Coronation Drive, and I can assure you this development will impede my view. Furthermore, I've read in the paper how often if a developer chucks a couple bones, they get to add a couple stories. And if that happens, if this development, this rezoning application happens and this 12-story high-rise goes ahead, I have no doubt that it'll end up being 14 or something like that. So it may not impede the view of the northward-facing residents, but I assure you it will impede the view of northwest and westward-facing residents, because I'm one of them and I know what's going to happen. So
Okay, you're at 6 minutes now.
Thank
so-
you very much. Let's be smart.
Thank you. Come forward, state your name, if you're comfortable giving your address, and then you have 5 minutes.
Hi, good evening. My name is Lily Seed. 1541 High Park Road was Anglican Church, Church of Hosannas. So I bought the building and renovated to the medical spa. This project, my concern is because the age of the building. The church was built 1888, so it's 131 years old. And the development is right behind the church, I think between the 1541 and the Angers. So, and I have some, my concern about the construction method will be used in this project. And what kind of construction method will be used, and how far below grade will be digging, and how many underground stories. And another one is, are those construction method going to cause vibrations that will affect nearby structure? And what precautions will be taken to minimize any impacts to nearby structures? And another major concern I have is the brick of the church is very weak now, and it start to have the old church used 3 layers of brick, and now start to show the vertical cracking, then will cause the foundation to settle, and will cause leaking. That's a big concern, and I just had a masonry fix some part of the damage caused by when expand the High Park Road, and really worries me. And then the other thing is when the project start, if they start, when the digging and the drill, the pile to support the structure, and if they use with water, it's going to cause the wash out the soil. And I believe the structure, they are going to increase the grade, make it higher than my property. And then what kind of damage is going to cause is something we have to think about it to respect the historical building. So that's my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other members of the public that wish to speak to this? So I'll look for a motion to close the public participation meeting moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Hopkins, and we'll vote on that.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
So I'll go to transportation staff first. There were questions about the traffic on Gainsborough Road, whether or not Gainsborough, is there, nobody's here from transportation? Yes? No? Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My colleague had to step out for the evening. He's not feeling very well. But what I can say is we do have 2 upcoming projects in this area. We do have a traffic signal that's planned for the intersection of Coronation and Gainsborough. And then also through the DC, we are planning to make that extension of Coronation Drive up to Gainsborough Road as well, which hopefully, similar to the work that was done in the other, on the earlier application this evening, will help, like with Dalmagary, will hopefully alleviate some of the traffic concerns in the area. But what I can do as well is I will discuss with transportation staff following the meeting tonight and try and have the answer before council on what the plans are in the area for any further construction works. I don't believe we have any plans to expand Gainsborough Road to 4 lanes at this point, but there could be something else that they are planning.
So I wonder if planning staff could, I believe there was a traffic impact study as part of this. If you could briefly comment on what the comments are in the report from Transportation Division.
Yes, there was a transportation impact study that was provided. I did provide a brief overview of it. It concluded that there wouldn't be any impacts based on the forecasted traffic volumes from both the mixed-use building and the 12-story apartment building. It did identify concerns about left turn storage and capacity on Hyde Park Road at the intersection of Gainsborough Road, but did make recommendations that with the adjustments to the signalization at the intersections, that would deal with the concerns for the northbound left turn lane. The southbound on Hyde Park, left turn lane, would be required to be lengthened from 70 meters, I believe, to 90 meters.
And there was also a question about the church that's nearby. First of all, is it a designated heritage structure? I wonder if staff would know that. Sorry to throw you a curveball, but.
I do not believe that it is a designated structure. It may be identified as a listed structure on the heritage.
So there were questions about the impacts of construction, the construction methods, how deep the excavation is expected to be, whether there will be any effect on the structure of this church because of the vibrations and in general, the construction, whether the water used in construction methods would cause some erosion to the soil, and then changes to grading and how that will affect the church. So that's a whole bunch of concerns that were brought up, and I wonder if staff could comment there.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can speak to the grading issues and I can take a shot at the vibration. So for the grading, we obviously want to ensure that there's no impact to adjacent properties, and we're going to work through the site plan process to ensure that we're mitigating the impacts of that site on other neighboring sites. With respect to vibration, at this point, I don't think we know the actual depth of what the building is going to be. That's going to be based on a lot of the study that we do through some of the architectural work as well as the site plan. At the end of the day, I mean, what I've found on other projects as well is that the vibration from a construction site is usually a short duration, and it doesn't usually create new issues. If there are existing issues, those might be exacerbated, but those are something that the contractor and the developer would be working with the adjacent or neighboring properties to mitigate.
Mr. Kokoros, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. With respect to the jurisdiction that the Ontario Building Code has, it has none whatsoever in terms of the construction techniques or methods used. However, there are requirements in terms of protecting adjacent structures if the foundations of a new building are to undermine foundations of an existing building. That's pretty much where it stops.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Another interesting development. With respect to some of the concerns, the building impact in terms of construction style, I would just point to Azure, the building right downtown on Talbot Street, which is directly adjacent, like right next to an old church. And it's a 20-plus story apartment building that was built right next to it without adverse impact. I believe what we're looking at in this circumstance is a couple hundred to a few hundred meters in distance between where the proposed sites of these two buildings are. And I'd imagine that the vibration impacts of just general traffic on Hyde Park Road would probably be more significant than the construction impacts in this circumstance. A concern was raised with respect to the potential, I think that was being referred to as what we use as bonusing. So where a developer will trade extra or cash contributions or other public good benefits in order to get some higher density and height. In this circumstance, the bonusing has been applied. So it's an exchange for parking provisions and for the affordable housing that's going to be included in at least 18 of the units on that site. When bonusing occurs, then that locks in the form as it gets proposed tonight. So if what you see tonight doesn't get any bigger, any higher. It's exactly the form that's proposed here. So you can rest assured that the heights that are being proposed tonight are the ones that ultimately get passed if the committee approves it. With respect to the application itself, I am very impressed at the offset for affordable housing, at 10% of the units in the building. I think that's one of the higher affordable housing offsets we've seen, and probably one of the deeper market rate reductions as compared to 75% in a large number of the units there and 90% in the others. Really well done. That it's what I really like is it's throughout the city. This isn't just necessarily core developments or on rapid transit routes. This is in areas where we need to see mixed affordabilities throughout the city. So I at first was a little apprehensive as I looked at the design. It looked a little odd. I can appreciate the traffic concerns, but at the same time, all the development, a multi-story building on Coronation is a contributor to traffic in the same way that a mid-rise building on Gainsborough is a contributor to traffic. Everything that we have is a contributor to traffic, and anybody who's in traffic is traffic. So I think the better we can support these areas with public transit, the better that we can do in terms of reducing the amount of traffic congestion that we see here. I think it's smart to see the mixed use having ground level commercial so that there is actually a pedestrian oriented development. Meeting the street on Gainsborough and having the residential tower a little bit further back allows for a better perception of scale. The shorter building up front, the larger building a bit further back, I think is complementary to the neighborhood. Again, this is another neighborhood and area. Hyde Park is one of the fastest growing areas of the city. Of course, there's going to be more impacts, more population, more density, more traffic, everything that goes with that. The question is, how do we build it, and do we build it intelligently? I think in this circumstance, it addresses a lot of the concerns in how we do that in a way that has mixed density development. We're not just putting single family homes on lots right now. We're starting to look at filling in the intervening spaces, which is exactly how we do this. So it has my support. I'd move the motion.
Councillor Keabaga.
Thank you, through Madam Chair. I concur with my colleague here. He actually just took all the words that I wanted to say. I just wanted to touch on the fact that, number one, it's in Hyde Park, which is quite exciting to see something like this go in Hyde Park. It's not every day that we see affordable housing being proposed in a neighborhood like that, so I thought that was really great. And the percentage that was proposed, 10%, is amazing, and seeing that there is also 2.2% of it to be in accessible housing is amazing. So I just want to thank staff for this report and the developers that are working on this project, and I would love to see more of these projects like this come around. And I also wanted to touch base on the bonusing part, but he already explained it really well. The bonusing is already included in this. You're not going to see anything different, but this is something that should be celebrated because it's a good plan, and hopefully this will encourage the developer community to build more affordable housing and have, these bonusing go into affordable housing and less parking, well, not less parking, but focus more on affordable housing as well. So thank you.
Any other comments, questions from committee? No. I just want to thank the members of the public for coming out. I understand the concerns with traffic. As Mrs. Dowds said, it's happening everywhere in our city. And I think what the city and I have had talks about this with the city engineer. And what we need to do a better job of, I think, is anticipating, and it's not even a case of anticipating. We know where the growth is happening, and we know where development applications have been approved, and we know where development is taking place. We need to stop reacting and start going in at the same time or even a step ahead of the developments. I know in Ward 5, it's happening all along Sunningdale Road, just explosive development all over the city, and that's what happens with a growing city. We have policies to try to encourage this kind of high density and intense growth happening in the core or along our transit corridors. Doesn't always happen the way we would really like it to happen. The west end of the city, especially the southwest, is particularly explosive in its growth right now. So I do sympathize. I know it's happening everywhere. As Councillor Turner said, we have to improve other modes of transit, other modes of transportation, including transit, to allow people different ways of getting around rather than just relying on cars. I do like that this is a mixed-use development, as some of the developments taking place on Sunningdale Road are, to encourage people to stay in their community, to shop in their community, to do their quick little errands within their community so that they don't have to add more cars to the road and drive around. I was really happy to see the affordable housing, and as Councillor Turner mentioned, with that bonusing, it sort of locks it in. So there won't be any surprises down the road. It's a what you see is what you get. The zoning goes with this exact design with all of the main details that are in that design. So there's not going to be any changes down the road. But 75% for 20 years, I think that's the best we've seen so far. And I'm really proud of staff, and I'm really pleased with the developer, with the applicant, because we have a need in our community. It's a dire need, and I'm really happy to see someone from the private sector step up and try to help with that. So I will support the staff recommendation. It's been moved by Councillor Turner. It's seconded by Councillor Keabaga, and we can vote on that. Unless somebody else has anything else they want to add? No. I do want to add that many of the concerns, that were brought up will be handled at the site plan issue. Staff will look at all of these issues that were brought up tonight when it comes to the site plan phase, which is where you get into the building permit and the nitty-gritty stuff.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
So we have the deferred matters list. I wonder if somebody would like to move that, if there are any questions or comments on the deferred matters list. Moved by Councillor Helmer, Deputy Mayor Helmer, and seconded by Councillor Hopkins. I'm not seeing any questions, so we can vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And before we move in camera, I just want to make a few comments. Mr. Wallace jumped the gun on us here, but I also want to say thank you to Mr. Fleming, John Fleming. I first met John in 2010, I think. Not as long as, I haven't known him as long as Councillors Turner and Hopkins, but I remember John came out to our neighborhood to educate us about the planning process. And it was, as everything that John does, professional, thorough, informative, and made us have the information that we needed to deal with the issue at hand at the time. John has always been that way, not only when I was just a homemaker, living at home, working with my neighborhood, getting voluntold to be the president of a new a homeowners association in the area. And John was always a very valuable resource as our neighborhood worked through the planning process and the planning application. We don't always agree. We haven't always agreed. I've always agreed with your vision, John. You've done some really amazing things. You've really moved the ball forward for London. I know you always have acknowledged that it's never just you, that it's always a team, and it's not even just planning as part of your team. You've worked with everybody across the board in the whole organization, and it's been an honor and a privilege and a pleasure to work with you. So thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'd like to take 30 to 40 minutes if it's okay with the clerk to say a couple things, but I do remember those days coming out to the Stony Brook neighborhood and speaking. I remember you as an absolute powerhouse as the leader of that neighborhood, and it's been amazing to watch you as you've now taken on the reins as a councillor and today in the chair of planning committee. So what an evolution, and I've been glad to be here to watch that. On that note, there's just a couple of things I'd like to say if I could. The first one relates to city council. I'm just so amazed. I think it's 10 councils that I got to see in operation over my tenure here since I was here as a student originally. And I don't think that everyone, and probably not even anyone, recognizes how much work councillors do, how passionate they are about the future of the city, how much they care, and how much work they do. And I've just been really humbled to work with the councils over time. And huge kudos for all that you do. Second is the community. I've been so lucky to work with Londoners throughout my career. The London plan was an incredible process. I really enjoyed that. But every neighborhood that I've worked with, I just find them to be so passionate about their neighborhood, about their city, about whatever subject they might be interested in, whether it's the environment or heritage. And I'm always amazed by how willing they are to spend the time, sacrifice other things that they might be able to do with that time in order to do something great for their community. And it's amazing to see these people that get outside of themselves and their own personal interest to do things for others. And finally, I can't tell you how honored I am to have worked with the people that are the staff of here at the City of London, both current and past. It's just been an amazing group of people. Again, I don't think that people realize just how passionate our staff are, from the senior leadership team all the way through the organization, how much they care, how much they want to see a great city, and how hard they work to make it happen. So thank you for allowing me to make those couple comments, and thank you for your kind words.
Excellent. Any other comments from anybody? No? Deputy Mayor's looking at me
I'm
like.
saving mine for a council, so.
So I need a motion to go in camera. Moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Kabaga. We can vote on that. And we will adjourn from the committee room. We'll do a show of hands to go in camera. All in favor? And that is unanimously carried.